And I changed it to Michael.
We love you either way.
Yeah.
Thank you.
We'll start calling you me for short.
Excellent.
There you go.
All right, then. So let's get this meeting started. Pretty much have everyone here. So welcome to the planning board meeting for the month of February. Due to the ongoing public health emergency of COVID-19 and to comply with the executive orders signed by the governor of the state of New Jersey, this meeting is being held via Zoom. Pursuant to Section 5 PL 1975, this is to state for the record that adequate notice of this meeting has been provided to the public by notification to the news record in January 2021, posting on the municipal website, and by filing of said notice in the office of the municipal clerk. Mr. Edelson, would you please call the roll?
Yes. Mayor McGehee.
Here.
Ms. Adams.
Here.
Ms. Latham.
Here.
Mr. Bolden.
Here.
Mr. Carlson.
Here.
Mr. Fryette.
Here.
Ms. Denuser.
Present.
Ms. Ward.
Here.
Chair Pashota.
Here.
Mr. Titus.
I'm here.
Great.
All here and
Thank you.
accounted for.
Thank you. Whereas Section 7 provides that the planning board has the permit, prohibit, or regulate the active participation of the public at any meeting, whereas it is the desire of this planning board to comply with the provisions of this act and at the same time to conduct its business in an orderly and expeditious manner, excuse me. Now therefore be it resolved by the planning board of the Township of Maplewood that it does prohibit, except as set forth in the formal agenda, active participation in the deliberations of the planning board at all of its regular meetings.
So moved.
Second.
Can we do that one by saying?
I'll do it quickly.
Okay.
Mayor McGehee.
Yes.
Ms. Adams.
Yes.
Ms. Latham.
Yes.
Mr. Bolden.
Yes.
Mr. Carlson.
Yes.
Mr. Fryette.
Yes.
Ms. Denuser.
Yes.
Ms. Ward.
Yes.
Chair Pashota.
Yes.
Mr. Titus.
Yes.
And the members of the planning board received the minutes from our last meeting held on Tuesday, January 12th via email. Does anyone have any amendments or edits to the minutes?
Move we accept.
Is that a motion, Mr. Bolden?
Oh, yes. I make a motion that we accept, the motion that we accept. The
Excellent.
minute.
And the second?
Yes. Second.
Mayor
Wonderful.
McGehee.
Yes.
Ms. Adams.
Yes.
Ms. Latham.
Yes.
Mr. Bolden.
Yes.
Mr. Carlson.
Yes.
Mr. Fryette.
Yes.
Ms. Denuser.
Yes.
Ms. Ward.
Yes.
Chair Pashota.
Yes.
Mr. Titus.
Yes.
Now, before we continue with our formal agenda, I just want to take a moment to revisit our appointment of Tom Carlson as our liaison to the Maplewood Village Alliance. Tom, do you want to talk a little bit about the change
Sure.
that we're proposing here?
Sure, I have held that position for a couple of years. I also held it for the very first year in 1997. I was the liaison from the planning board to the brand new Maplewood Village Alliance. After last month's reorganization meeting, Triniza Danuser called me up and asked, or expressed interest herself. And I was quite pleased to be able to step aside and let her take that position and gain that experience, and also bring her very impressive marketing and communication experience to that board. So with that, I agreed to step down. As much as I enjoyed holding that position, it also gives me great pleasure to pass it on to Trenisa. So that position is written into the ordinance that creates the Village Alliance, and as a representative from the planning board to that board. So it does require a vote of this body to approve that.
I'll move it.
I'll second.
Mayor McGehee,
Yes.
Ms. Adams,
Yes.
Ms. Latham,
Yes.
Mr. Bolden,
Yes.
Mr. Carlson,
Yes.
Mr. Fryatt,
Yes.
Ms. Denuser,
Yes.
Ms. Ward,
Yes.
Chair Pashota,
Yes, of course.
Mr. Titus.
Yes.
Tree, you gotta be quicker on the mute. Go ahead.
I didn't know I was supposed to vote for myself, so that's why I was a little slow. Thank you, Tom, for that kind endorsement, and thank you guys for your vote.
Well, and thank you for stepping up, and love that we're passing the baton along and doing so, ensuring the position and the role and the liaison, flow of information between both organizations. So thank you, Ms. Denuser. All right, so now back to our formal program. We have a resolution for case PB 2002. Are there any comments or proposed revisions to this resolution? Seeing none? Oh,
Madam
go ahead.
Chair, I'd like to make a motion that we approve this resolution.
Wonderful. And can we have a second?
Second.
Mayor McGehee,
Yes.
Ms. Adams,
Yes.
Ms. Latham,
Yes.
Mr. Bolden,
Yes.
Mr. Carlson,
Yes.
Mr. Fryatt,
Yes.
Ms. Denuser,
Yes.
Ms. Ward,
Yes.
Chair Pashota,
Yes.
Mr. Titus.
Yes.
All right, and moving on, we have two ordinance reviews. So we will start with 301421. This is regarding the accessory dwelling units. Is there any discussion, recommendations?
I think it would be helpful if one of the members of the township committee walked us through that very briefly, although it does seem very straightforward to me.
I'm happy to do so unless, Mayor, you would like to.
Go ahead, Ms. Adams. Thank you.
Basically, it's just in, when we passed the ordinance, it did not include historic, designated historic homes. And the township committee felt as if we would like, we didn't want to discriminate, if you will, about people who have a designated historic home should be able to at least consider and go through the process of getting approvals for accessory dwelling units. So we're amending the ordinance strictly to include those designated homes. There's like a handful in the town. I don't know the exact number, so I don't want to put that on the record. But there, it does require an additional approval by the Historic Preservation Commission for any homeowner of a historic home to put an ADU on there. And Mayor, you can add to that if I've left anything out. And I see Mr. Daffis is also here, so.
Thank you, Ms. Adams. I think you really nailed it. I mean, it's about opportunity for individuals who happen to have, a historical home. So we're not discriminating against them just because of that fact. So
I would,
Picking up a bit.
Frank, we're losing you a little bit at the end there, so.
Oh, no, that was it. Just, yeah,
Okay.
we're trying to provide balance and opportunity for all residents, regardless if their, their house is in a historical area or not.
There you go.
Thank you.
That's it.
If a homeowner were to want to do, were to have an historic home and were to want to add an ADU, could that potentially, could they request if the addition of the ADU were to make the home no longer fit the definition of historic, could they request to remove the designation?
I actually don't know the answer to that. Basically, I mean, that would be, I would expect that would be a separate process, and maybe others on the board who have more experience than I on this, I would expect that would be the case, that it would be a separate process, right? Maybe parallel, or maybe one happens before the other, but the HPC would have to approve it. And so what I'm gaining from what I'm guessing you're asking is, if the HPC doesn't approve it, the HPC has to approve it. So if they want to do it and the HPC doesn't approve it, then they would have to go through a separate process to try to remove that. As I'm literally thinking out loud on that. So
Sure.
Yeah, I agree with Ms. Abs. I think what you're playing a game of chess, like option, or game theory, not approved and therefore remove. We're hoping it doesn't go to that. I think hopefully the HPC is cognizant of, the rights of homeowners, and they're wanting their ability to have the opportunity to provide it, this type of dwelling as any resident who pays taxes in our township. So hopefully it wouldn't get to that. If it would, I think Ms. Adams is 100% accurate. That would be a logical process. But then again, I think there's some discriminatory issues there, in my personal opinion. So let's hope it doesn't get to that point.
And just so we're clear, all the other aspects of the ordinance with regard to setbacks and everything else still apply to these ADUs as well. So, there's that.
Madam Chairwoman, Dean
Mr.
Daffis.
Daffis is trying to talk.
Yes, Mr. Daffis.
I know that I'm a member of the public here, but if we can excuse the formalities, I'd like to add a couple.
I absolutely will. You are a member of the public, but you're certainly still a member of the township committee. So I welcome your input.
He's also the ADU expert, so go
Yes,
for it.
of course. Let's not forget that. Right. So please fill us in.
Not an expert, just a champion, but I work with a lot of experts on this issue. So I just wanted to answer the question that was posed by you, Madam Chairwoman, which is a very good question, as you tend to be always thoughtful, and you are again here. So this would follow the normal course that historic homes currently follow with other construction or expansion that those homeowners, try to get a permit to do. It goes through the Historic Preservation Committee's approval process, and they look to see if indeed what the homeowner is trying to do would no longer render the house, quote unquote, historic. In our experience, the 7 homes that we do have in town that are designated historic, they have all worked with the Historic Preservation Commission through the years in their respective improvements and upgrades. And the commission works with them as well in a very thoughtful and fair manner, because they don't want the homeowners to get pissed and want out of the historic designation. Their purpose is not to unreasonably withhold approval, but rather to be sensible, to work with homeowners, to provide them options that would allow them to do what they want to do to their home in a manner that would be a little bit more consistent with the historic designation. So accordingly, this would follow the same rules. Whether it's attached to the home or detached in the backyard. And as the mayor and Ms. Adams noted, we thought that we could possibly have a discriminatory ordinance that we were adopting and subject to litigation if we did not if we did not allow all homeowners of all kinds the equal access. That's all. Thank you.
That's very helpful. Thank you for that background. So I appreciate it. I just wanted to, ask the question. So that's very helpful to understand a little bit more about the process. But it doesn't change my feeling on it. So, and I didn't think it would, but does anyone else have any questions or comments regarding Ordinance 301421?
I have one quick one. I would just offer, as I mentioned in the past about the ADUs, the potential concern with the historic architectural stock in the town. I've read through this carefully and find that the additional controls are well considered, and really, there's enough language in here, careful language, that I feel confident that it will preserve the physical housing stock that we have and the historic character of the architecture, and appreciate the efforts to be equitable, and find that I can support this wholeheartedly.
I would just like to thank Tim for all his input along the way with this ordinance. You've been really helpful and thoughtful in everything we've considered outside of the planning board official meeting, but just work. He's been really helpful in working through some of the issues back in the day. I don't know when it was, maybe 50 years ago, because we have no concept of time at the moment. So yeah, so just thanks a lot, Mr. Fryatt, for your expertise and guidance.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure.
Madam Chairwoman, may I add one more thing, and then I promise to be quiet for the rest of the meeting.
I won $20 on that, $20.
Mr. Jarvis, you are more than welcome to add your comments to the conversation. They are welcome.
I appreciate your courtesy once again, and I will not abuse it, as I said, I promise. So I just wanted to echo what Ms. Adams said about Mr. Fryatt. Tim, thank you, sir. You've been incredible and valuable resource in this. We've had a lot of conversations, you and I together, in finding a way to balance out all of the interests with this ordinance. So thank you again. And I just want to let everybody know, very excited about this, very proud for all of us, that Maplewood received an honorable mention in the Washington Post earlier today about ADUs, and ADUs were also covered in the New York Times this past weekend. So go check that out. Maplewood is right up there at the top. So we're getting national recognition about an issue that is very topical right now. And I thank you all for your support.
That's great news. That's great to hear. So,
Yeah, definitely.
so Mr. Edelson, refresh my memory. Do we need to actually vote on the ordinance?
Just a reminder of what you're supposed to be doing when you're reviewing the ordinance. And that is, you're supposed to be reviewing it to see whether there's anything in the proposed ordinance which is inconsistent with the master plan, and to make recommendations concerning inconsistencies if you find any. And then you may add recommendations on any other matters that you deem appropriate. So, for example, if you found that this is not inconsistent with the master plan, you could simply report back to the governing body that you do not find any inconsistencies in this ordinance with the master plan, but you can add whatever you want in terms of recommendations.
All right, so I guess the question I should truly be asking the board is, did anyone find any inconsistencies with between this ordinance and the master plan?
I think we already found that consistency last time we looked at it, no? I'm a little confused.
Correct. And,
Yeah, I don't think that's, that's, thank you, Nancy, yep.
yeah, it's just the addition of the HPC part of it. So Michael, I don't know if that changes, or you just ask the question all over again because we made amendments to the ordinance. Is this still consistent with the master plan?
Yeah, that's the issue.
Yeah, okay.
I certainly think there is enough in the master plan to say that it is consistent with the master plan. So that you do not need to find any inconsistencies. I don't believe there are any, but if there are, you're supposed to point them out and make recommendations in regard to them.
I just have a quick question because it is a conditional use. Is it clear that it has to go before the HBC? I mean, is that, I just don't see it in the ordinance and just want to make sure that they have an opportunity to review, even if that is the intent.
I believe it is, but maybe I'm missing something. I think it requires for historic homes that they get approval by HBC before, just like any other building permits.
Yep, that's correct. It should be in there. We looked at this pretty tightly. So the answer is yes.
Yes, so it's no longer a conditional use, it's a permissible use. And yes, I violated that. I wasn't going to speak again. Mrs. Adams was right. So it's no
20
longer.
bucks, you owe me 20 bucks.
Yeah, I do. And I'm happy to give it to you. It drinks when we can. So it's permissible use. It's no longer conditional use, which is the way we went about it the first time. And HPC review, in addition to construction official zoning permit review, are required for historic homes.
All right, thank you.
So-
Also happy to hear that it's no longer, it's permissible, not conditional too. So good.
Agreed.
So then, does anyone from the planning board have any recommendations related to this ordinance that you wish to make to the governing body?
Madam Chair, I would move that we find no inconsistencies with the master plan and support this amendment to the zoning ordinance.
I'm happy to second that motion.
I think we can do this by voice vote.
All right, all in favor? Aye.
Yes.
Aye.
Any opposed? Seeing none, it carries. Great. Thank you. The motion carries. All right, so now moving on to ordinance 301521 regarding site triangles.
Madam Chair Prosciutto, if I may, I'd like to say a couple of words.
Absolutely, Mr. Bolden.
I would like to say that I am glad to see this ordinance appear. I think it is something that we probably asked for on a lot of developments, that site triangles be shown on their drawing. Having a background in planning and transportation that spans over, let's just say, a few decades, I heartily endorse this and eagerly and happily offer my support for this ordinance.
Thank you. Thank you for that resounding endorsement. So you find it consistent with the master plan, and at this time you have no recommendations for the governing body with respect to it?
No, I did a quick look at the master plan that does not even speak towards site triangles, because I was looking at planning for a quote unquote global perspective and not on a property or a site by site perspective. I see this would be within what's the word I want to say? I see it would conform to the master plan and not provide any type of impedance to anything, because we're just asking that site triangles be provided, which is not, that's an engineering and a drawing and an indication on the engineering drawings and project submittals that we receive. I think is wholly consistent.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Does anyone else have any comments? And Mr. Bolden, I appreciate you especially reminding us of your expertise specifically in transportation and transportation planning. Certainly value that expertise in your background. Does anyone else have any comments regarding this ordinance?
Just a minor, I believe it references the 2011 geometric design manual. I believe there's been a 2018 and that will keep getting updated by AASHTO. So I don't know if there's any value to just saying the most recent guidance by AASHTO, or if we just want to tie it to the 2011 T. I mean, it doesn't matter to me. I just, want to point that out, that that's already older. There's a newer one out.
I would just say that you could add that it be consistent with current recommendations. But if you feel that it's necessary. That's all I have to say.
Yeah, I like the idea of making it with current guidelines so that the ordinance stays current with the latest information.
Fine, fair enough.
Anyone else have any recommendations or thoughts? All right, then it sounds like our only recommendation will be to change, to edit the ordinance so that it reflects not a specific manual, but stays current. Mr. Edelson, do we need to vote on that?
Just a voice vote.
Okay, so all those in favor of finding this ordinance to be consistent with the master plan and making the one recommendation that the wording is changed to reflect the current guidance, please say aye.
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 All those opposed? Very good. The motion carries. All right, and with that, move on to continuing the case that we were hearing last month, application PB 2005. And I see that Ms. Moore is here. And so Ms. Moore, at this time, I will turn it over to you for, I think, when we left off, you had concluded with Mr. Waga's testimony and we were ready to move on to your next witness. Is that correct?
That is correct. And good evening, Chair and members of the board. My name is Marcia Moore from the law firm of Post Pollock on behalf of the applicant. So the last time we were here, we did have testimony from Mr. Gregory Waga on the architectural component. Tonight, we would like to start with our civil engineer and traffic engineer, Brian Intidola, who will be testifying both capacity. And then we also have our planner. I know there were some comments from the board requesting some updated renderings. We will be addressing that, more specifically the elevations, I believe from the Wesley and Amherst side, from the vantage point of the neighbors. We have submitted some renderings and we'll be discussing that later during the course of our testimony, or presentation rather.
Thank you. Mr. Intindola, just for a moment before I swear you in, I'd like to just remind members of the public that by which you will have an opportunity to ask questions of each witness and comment later in the process. Please know that you will not be permitted to comment when the planning board does get to its deliberations, but you will have an opportunity to ask questions after the planning board has asked questions of each witness. So please bear with us as we try to do this in an orderly fashion. There's been a lot of interest in this case and we want to make sure that we get to everyone. So I will periodically be reminding people where we are in the program so that we make sure that we do try to get to everyone. So Mr. Intindola, am I pronouncing that correctly?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. Mr. Intindola, do you swear that the testimony you're going to give tonight will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I so affirm.
Thank you. Ms. Moore, please go ahead.
Mr. Intidola, can you just give the board your educational background and what license, if any, you hold?
Thank you. I have the benefit of education from New Jersey Institute of Technology as both a bachelor's and master's in civil engineering. Also am a licensed professional engineer in the state of New Jersey. My license is current to 2022. I appeared before this board for an application across the street from this site, as well as the prior application that I provided my direct testimony as well. And I work in the field of municipal scale, civil site improvements, as well as traffic engineering design, similar municipal scale, meaning projects that are presented to boards, and I both review applications for boards as well as present before boards such as yours.
So
Thank you.
Chair, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, we're happy to accept Mr. Intindola as an expert.
Thank you for your generosity.
So Mr. Intindola, you're familiar with the plans and you were retained by the applicant to prepare civil plans in connection with this application. As I mentioned tonight, you're discussing the civil component of this application that will delve into the traffic that you provided a report in anticipation of this hearing.
Yes, ma'am. So if I may, I'd like to go into my direct testimony unless the voir dire is concluded.
You can go, Brian. The voir dire is concluded. Thanks.
So we're before you to present a multifamily residence at the corner of Wellesley and Springfield Avenue in Maplewood. The project, the existing conditions, I won't belabor them, was a former car lot as well as an H&R Block. Those uses are no longer active. For the most part, with the car lot and the H&R Block, the area is pretty much impervious, and what we are going to take that site and what we are proposing before this board is to construct a 40-unit apartment building. First floor will be parking underneath, 61 spaces provided. If you count the bike parking spaces or the bike allocation, it's 62 spaces in total. We are proposing to grade the site out based on what we had heard from input from the township. We note that we moved the building forward towards Springfield Avenue, which thereby increased our side yard to the rear neighbors, and then gives us the street presence, which I believe is the intention of the zone that we're in, the pedestrian retail business district. But that will be for the planner to affirm, not me. But we are proposing drainage improvements that are significant to capture the stormwater that we create, manage it, and release it to the Maplewood storm system as appropriate. We are also proposing to consolidate. Basically, there's an open curb cut.
So Brian, do you have your civil plans? Do you want to share your screen?
Oh, sure. However you want to do it. I bring them up. I will. Let me just get into the drive that has them.
April might need to give you permission to share a screen.
Okay, let me just make sure I'm in the right drive.
Or I might be able to do that.
Bear with me. Because my staff hides my stuff. I don't know why. I think they found it amusing.
Just a quick question. These, what you're about to show to us would be the same plans that were received by the township on December 23rd, 2020, titled preliminary and final site plan application?
That is correct, sir. They are dated with revision date on the preliminary final. The last revision date that I have is 7/14/20. Individual sheets are also 17/14/20 on the last revision box. And I believe that's what you have in front of you. All right. Final site plan coming up, and I'll share that in a second as soon as it comes up on the computer. Okay, we're here, and now I'm going to ask permission to share screen. Disabled. I just would need the security to get into the share screen.
Ms. Miller, can you give Mr. Intindola the ability to share his screen?
Sure.
As soon as I'm enabled, I will be there. Pick up.
Let me see if I can do it.
I believe I can share.
Oh,
Yeah, you
excellent.
should be able to do it.
Do you see
Thank
this?
you. Yes, we can. Thank
Okay.
you.
So basically, this is the site plan that's before you. Basically, as we were speaking about, this is the cover sheet. And I'm going to just go into the aerial a little bit so we can just appreciate where the neighborhood is. And so that's where we are. That basically, if you could see that in the center, I think my cursor got lost a little bit because it's camouflaged, but that yellow rectangle represents our site, which shows the existing H&R Block and the little used car dealer hut that will be demolished, as well as the H&R Block to make way for the project. So that is on the cover sheet. If I may, I will go to the demolition plan, which is, actually, this is not the demolition plan. This is the soil conservation plan, which that's when we send it to the county. All right, so let's talk about what's there. We are proposing to remove most of the improvements that are there. We're going to remove the trees to the rear of the property to accommodate our proposed new landscaping run, as well as the retaining wall. So then that is basically the demolition plan. And we are going to remove all the open curb cuts along Springfield Avenue that are there. And we are going to consolidate the curb cuts into one. So this would be, and I will refer to this as sheet 4 of our site plan package, which is a 1-for-1. So then you can see where we have the parking layer or the parking level. We are proposing a mixed-use building. We'll have a mix of 16 one-bedrooms and 24 two-bedroom and 2 3-bedroom units. I believe the count is right. I don't think that's changed. And then we have a small retail of about 1,700 square foot that Mr. Waga, the architect, he can, I think he introduced that. That's going to be neighborhood retail or something of that type. So as you see, our parking spaces, even though they are underneath the building, they provide a typical maneuverability of 9x18s with a 24-foot parking aisle, which is as to be expected. And we've strategically located the ADA parking opposite the entrance area, as well as with a crosswalk denoting that that is the area to walk in. One of the features of this, I'm interspersing site as well as the functionality for access, but I will reinforce that with traffic testimony as well. That if we look and see where my cursor is, that we do have an inset to manage vehicles so they can get quickly off the street and also be card managed for access in a way that it's not blocking the sidewalk. As per input of the township review staff, we have a double-sided sign showing vehicle exiting, and we will supplement that with a auditory system as well as a light system that will merge, not be obnoxious with the building aesthetic, but will denote that we are having vehicles are exiting the site, so people are not taken by surprise. As well as we heard last week or last month that it would be appropriate to look at a fisheye mirror or a convex mirror system to give a better field of vision for both pedestrians and motorists that are coming in and out of the site. So then we going on to, and as you were just speaking about the site triangle ordinance, I believe this would serve as a template for what you would want to see. We meet the site triangle based on the 35-mile-per-hour road. So that is looking out. That is the right turn out. And then we have the other one, which is the site distance for left turning vehicles. and we make the site distance. We don't see any obstructions using typical engineering site distance. So that is addressed in our site plan package as requested by your reviewing engineer. Our next thing to speak about or touch upon is our drainage system. We are going to capture water from the site, stormwater that is, bring it into a piping system, have an oversized pipe to retain some of the water, control the water out, and then send the water out to the this existing storm system, which is a former NJDOT system as well as the township system. And we believe there's enough capacity to accommodate what we are piping. And as the site is mostly pervious today, we are slightly less, we're slightly more pervious than what is now. So we believe that 1-for-1 will actually generate less stormwater. And I'm going to zoom into the rear yard in terms of grades. It's not really a rear yard, it's a double side yard, but that's okay. Just for speaking the vernacular, this is the run. We have a retaining wall. I don't know if you could see it with my cursor, top of wall, bottom wall. The wall follows the grade. It kind of diminishes as we work our way down Springfield Avenue away from Wesley till it fades basically to nothing. One of the prior iterations of the site plan recognized that this was maybe an impediment to this exit door. We have since removed that wall and we don't have the as much of a return wall as prior. This area back here has a undulating sidewalk with future plantings, which will be touched upon in the landscape plan. Another feature of this is that we are respecting the setbacks as required for Wesley, and also the transition lot we are not respecting next to the liquor store. We have an alleyway, and that we recognize that we are asking for that variance, but it was touched upon before. And this is a walkway that, as the architect has said, has limited access out, I believe, is what the intention of that walkway is. We did provide that. And we also note that we are respecting the Wesley setbacks, and we provide a nice, well, I'll characterize it as a generous sidewalk in the front that can be used for the intention of the pedestrian zone that we're in, providing plenty of pedestrian space for that. These are just some of the details of the site plan in terms of elevations that were requested. And then we have the drainage and the profile and the building height is all marked here. That's how we get the average grade. It's 101. And then I believe that the architect and as well as our planner will talk in more detail about your ordinance with respect to height. And here we have the landscape plan. We are providing, we are removing the various trees that are in the back, but we are replanting a run of emerald green arborvitae, which are, I think we're doing 61 in total. And then we're doing 3 accent trees in the undulating path in the grass area in the back, which will be accessible back in the back of the garage, as well as the exit doors that are in the back corner of the site that lead to that alleyway.
If I may, sir, quick question.
Yes.
How tall will these arborvitaes, what's the maximum height that the arborvitaes will grow?
Well, if they're done right, I've seen them. I'm not a landscape architect, but I've seen them be comfortable at about 20 feet. They can come in at various sizes. They have most success where we put an irrigation system in with a soaker hose. And I would recommend that we come away from this meeting with that as a hard condition. So then we have some assurance that the arborvitae do thrive. And then the install height, which I believe you may ask that next question. We are looking to go to not the 4 to 8 size, but maybe the next size up. So we get immediate screening, so we don't have to wait for nature to take its course. But we get the screening intention is basically they're installed at 8-foot minimum. And I think that's another hard, not a hard condition, but something for us to consider if you were to look favorably upon this the site plan that we're presenting to you tonight.
So just to, I'm sorry to interrupt it. Well, just on the arborvitae, I mean, it's really unimaginative. And, you know, while it does provide screening, it's so boring and they can often get, you know, brown and die and out of shape and just, it just would be nice to see a little more creativity since you're taking down mature trees, to see a little more thought go into the plan, the landscaping plan at the rear of the building, especially since that affects all those residential homes back there. So I personally, I'm disappointed. You have like a few trees and then like 60 arborvitae, and it's about as basic as you can get. And every single plan that comes before any planning board has arborvitae because they're easy, they're cheap, and you know, they serve as a screen, but they're ugly. So I would just like you to I would respectfully request something a little more appropriate for the neighbors.
So in anticipation of that question, the of course, this is almost like a placeholder to put the arborvitaes in with the because we heard the feedback from the neighbors that they want as much screening as possible. So this gives us as much screening as possible as soon as possible. We can work with your professionals if that's the way this board operates to come up with a more creative plan with some more interest.
I would prefer you bring something more interesting before this board.
Yeah, that's why I'm posing the question, because
Yeah, well, at least speaking for myself, I would like there to be some more creativity while providing the screening that the neighbors request, because I would expect that the neighbors might also like something more interesting than a row of arborvitae.
Yes, you know, I take your comments to heart, and fortunately, we have an excellent hybrid planner / landscape engineer on our landscape architect on our team, Mr. McDonough, and we would like then to take the opportunity at your lead to come back with a plan that will be, you know, interesting to look at through the 4 seasons. I believe not to editorialize what you're looking for, but something more interesting instead of a palisade of arborvitaes. We understand what you're saying. And just as a side note, and not that I'm a landscape architect, what we found recently, I just planted them myself, is that they have a double blooming lilac. I didn't know if anybody knew that. It blooms in the spring and in the fall. So maybe we can work them in as well, which is, I'm a big fan of the lilacs. But yes, we would come back. I guess, of course, we, as the advocate for the applicant, we'd like to be one and done, but we understand the careful thought that this board gives to its applications. And we would come back with a more carefully thought out and hopefully beautiful landscape plan for the rear portion. So if that's, I don't know if we've answered that comment, but we're willing to participate in that process. So that is the overview for the, that I think we should need to talk about the lighting plan. What we are intending to do is mount as much as possible and provide the functionality that we need in the rear yard or the run, the undulating run in the backyard. And we provided a well shielded light that respects your ordinance. And basically, as you see in the lighting plan before you, it would cut off at the proposed privacy fence, which we are going to construct on the property line, a little bit off the property line is typical. And that fence, we're hoping to put in a, you know, a tasteful PVC fence, which is the current style, And then we would have the trees to supplement that as well. So that's what that illustrates on the lighting plan that you see before you, which is sheet number 6.01.
So just, Mr. Antondola, just for clarity, so the arborvitae or some other natural screening would be outside the fencing?
It would be if you're working your way from Springfield Avenue, you will like say if we go out like just we're going out like a rear door here, right?
I'm with you. Yep.
So you're in the grass area, then you're on to the sidewalk, then you encounter the knee wall, the retaining wall to make the grades work,
Okay.
and then you'll have a row of arborvitae, and then you'll have the PVC fence.
Okay. And how high will the PVC fence be?
At the board's pleasure. I'm a fan of the 5-foot fence myself. I think 6 is sometimes a little bit walling off if you had that. And I think with that interspersed with the garages that are there, I think the 5-foot will work nicely there. And then you'll have the hopefully tasteful plantings poking over the fence in the future or upon planting. So
And the bottom of the fence will be above the grade of the knee wall, correct?
the bottom of the fence, yes. So what we do, how I grade that is that I like to put a little back pitch so that you don't have the airspace between the bottom of the fence, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the backyard. So what we do is we set the fence, and then I basically bend a small berm as we come up over the top. It's like just enough to cover that airspace, which that's the way I like to do it. It's basically we'll follow that through on construction. So it gives you the that sense that the underneath is also instead of burying the bottom of the fence, you come off a little bit, then you come up with a little berm just to cover that gap space. And when you set the fences on a hill, sometimes you'll have a staggered fence line that you have to drop down. And in the drop down, that also helps make up for that drop down as well on the bottom, because then you can have one that's a little clicked a little bit higher and then down low. And then I can do a consistent ring across the back of the fence. And that gives you that little detail that you can fill.
I apologize for that ringing phone. My family, I'm sure, will answer it momentarily.
I'm waiting for my father-in-law to call me about.
So I guess what I'm getting at is that if you're standing on the sidewalk, the undulating walkway across the back, not the sidewalk in the front. I misspoke. I'm sorry?
Yeah, I understand what you're saying.
Right. So if you're standing on that, the knee wall will be how high?
I think in that area it's about 5 foot. I can go to the grading plan and give you a definitive answer, but that's my.
I'm trying to get a sense. I'm trying to get a sense of how high the PVC fencing will appear to be. I recognize that it will be 5 feet from grade if that's what we choose ultimately. But I'm trying to get a sense of how it will appear for someone standing on that walkway.
Yeah, and I totally agree, Chairwoman. I think, I think we said this at the last meeting that a section would be really helpful to kind of see what it looks like from, eye level. Like I'm a neighbor, or I'm walking along that path. What am I seeing? As opposed to these, tiny drawings that I literally have a magnifying glass looking at. But I get it. We're restrained by this, and but I just think it would be good to have a section, just like I think I asked for at the last meeting, for what the people who live on Amherst behind it see.
So go ahead, Brian. I was going to address that, but go ahead.
So to answer your question, we did a engineering cross section. That's I don't know if it serves the purpose or not, but we did strike a line. So in striking a line, you can see that we struck a line here through this, and that line that we struck is exaggerated with height in the vertical axis, which is typical for engineering illustration, but if you were in that spot, going back, right? Let me see if I can get both in at the same time. So if you were standing here-ish, right, where my cursor is,
Yes.
what you would perceive is the proposed building facade. Then you encounter the proposed retaining wall at this spot. Then there's the upgrade where we will put the arborvitaes. Then there's the existing garage. You can see this.
The existing what?
I'm sorry, I missed what you just said. The existing.
Sorry. So getting back so you could see it better. So then you would see this is basically grade. This is the proposed retaining wall, like the knee wall.
Mm-hmm.
And we have in this axis here, you have what we illustrated, a 4-foot high vinyl fence, which I said it was 5, which is what I prefer, but to be consistent with the plans, it is 4. And then you have the adjacent garage in that section. So if you would look, so I think one of your comments, and I don't want to mischaracterize what you were asking me, is that you may feel like you're in an alleyway in this run.
Well, that was part of my concern, but it's helpful to see that, you know, the garages of the adjacent neighbors, you know, are very close to their rear property lines. So, and I'm not suggesting that there's no need for a fence. I like the idea of a fence. I like the idea of natural screening. I just wanted to kind of get a sense of what that height is going to be like, because I think that part of my thinking in terms of what the height of the fencing should be, 4, 5, 6 feet, whatever that should be. And I don't have a strong opinion yet, is in thinking about the placement of the fence, the grade, the changing grade from the knee wall to the berm that you're recommending to the fence after that. So although it may be a 4 or 5 foot fence, for someone standing on the undulated walkway, it will appear to be a much taller fence.
Oh, absolutely. But the other view, the 180-degree view of that, is that if you're in your backyard living on the back street, you have what I would say a good-looking PVC fence at the appropriate height to provide the screening that you want. So from the applicant's perspective, and I might be getting kicked under the table, but he can't because he's not by me, which is good. So we would provide the fence height as appropriate that the board would like. You know, basically, if you look on the backside, not that I did the calculation, but for the frame garage that is here, it looks like it takes up about 40% of the view shed. And then in the space in between is where you'd see our fence, of course. And then in there we would have the appropriate size fence height-wise. And really, it's what the board would feel appropriate. We were all for our recommendation. I have 4 on my plans. I like a 5-foot fence because I think it just it weathers better and it holds up a little bit better than the 6. And I've seen 5 with the 1-foot lattice, which also breaks it up and gives a little peekaboo effect on the top. But that's just my taste. I've done the 5 and the lattice, the crisscross lattice up top, which makes it a little bit more interesting to look at. And that might be the board's direction, because it does provide screening, but it also breaks it up a little bit. And you could see the landscaping that much sooner if it's not a 6-foot solid, it's 5, then you could see the landscaping that we were talking about before. So that's my 2 cents on that. Running a little far afield of my civil engineering expertise, but.
Oh, sorry. Could I just, while we're on the fence, could I just add you know, I didn't miss the irony of your attractive PVC comment, because I don't think those 2 words go together. Is there a concept for something better than a PVC fence?
Well, I mean, so like if we go through the catalog of what fencing is available, right? We start with the chain link. That's a non-starter.
Right.
Then you have chain link with the evergreen strips through them. It's okay. I mean, it serves its purpose.
No.
And then the next is then we start, then you switch over to wood, dimensional wood, like a shiplap, every other board, gives you some dimensionality. I don't believe it weathers as well as the PVC.
It
So-
might require maintenance by the property owner.
No, and we're not averse to that, but what I notice is that the PVC, the standard white PVC fence, like you would see, like I guess at a pool club when it first came out, that is gotten a little bit better, and we could do a wood grain PVC fence with the lattice on top. Not that we're going through catalog cut sheets right now, but if we are coming back anyway for the landscape plan specifically, I believe we should also offer a couple cut sheets for the board to look at in the state-of-the-art fencing that is also weather resistant. I don't know, is that a decent proffer for the board?
I personally would agree with coming back with that, but I also would like you to think more, first of all, also about whether or not the Springfield Avenue Partnership was cool with PVC, and to talk to them about what materials they might find more appropriate. And let's not forget that this backs up to the residential individual houses behind. And again, that's what they're seeing. And that's what they have to live with. So
Board member, can I just state something with respect to your comment on the SAP? Now, we'll be amenable to having comments from the SAP, but along that lines, respect to the landscaping, the applicant's preference again is to submit a landscaping plan. John McDonough is our planner, but again, Mr. Intadola mentioned that he is a landscape architect. So our recommendation and our suggestion, if the board is willing, is to provide that and have it a condition of approval if this application is approved, for us to submit to the engineer on what potential landscaping will be providing rather than come back. If we have to get the comments for the what fencing, or if the SAP is amenable to our proposed fence height or the type of fence that we're suggesting.
So I'm sorry, I'm confused. You wanted a condition of approval to have the consulting engineer?
So we would submit a landscaping plan, and that would have to be approved. I know you don't have a planner, the review engineers reviewed our application, but we would ask that be a condition of approval for us to provide a landscaping plan rather than come back if the board is so willing to do that.
Right now, I'm not, but I mean, that's just me. I think we have a ways to go yet, so.
If I may, have you had any discussion with the Springfield Avenue Partnership regarding fencing? Or is this without any of their input? I kind of get the impression that it's without their input. Am I wrong on that?
I have to look at my notes regarding Mr. Walters, because more so discussed it rather Mr. Intadola, because he's not been a party to the Springfield Avenue Partnership meetings. Our architect has been, but I don't believe that it was in our most recent. But again, we understand that there's ongoing discussion with the Springfield Avenue Partnership. We've submitted some documentation, and we have some additional documentation that we have provided. So certainly that would be something that we would have to include. But Mr. Intadola is not a party to any meetings that we've had so far in discussions, more so respect to the building and Mr. Waga's conversation.
So Madam Chairwoman, I believe Deborah Lyons, who's chair of the Springfield Avenue Partnership Design Review Committee, is present at this meeting. So it would be great to get her input if what we're trying to do is, get through this.
No, I'm absolutely agreeable to that. If Ms. Lyons is willing to address the board at this time.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes, we absolutely did make a recommendation for fencing, and we asked that they not use PVC fencing. We made that recommendation more than a year ago, but that fencing keeps showing up on their plan, so that's the history of that. We would like them to use wooden fencing. in deference to the residents behind them.
That's fair.
Thank you. I'd like to get back to the question that I was trying to get the answer to, which was for Mr. Intandola. So showing us the cross section at the line that you had drawn there is absolutely helpful. What I'm trying to get a sense of is if you are, and let's say at that line, because I realize that the pitch changes east to west as well as north to south. So if you're at that line, what would be the height of the fence from the grade at which the
So if we follow the top of wall,
right, and that's 5 feet, correct?
right, so from the elevation that we have, it's about, in this location, it's about 5 foot. And then we have another, say, 3 to 4 feet up along this incline, which where the landscaping bed is. And then we start the fence, and then the fence comes up.
Okay.
If that answered your question.
Yes, that absolutely does. So then if we had a 5-foot fence, as you were recommending, regardless of what material it might be made out of, if it was a 5-foot fence, the top of that fence would appear to be approximately 13 feet from the grade of the walkway at that spot, recognizing that
Right.
the grade changes east to west, but
So it's 5 plus the landscaping, so the trees will be in front of it.
Mhm.
And then this is our grade, this is our landscape bed.
right.
So that's another 3 or 4. So we're 5, 8 plus 5 is about 13 feet.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful. That's what I wanted to know. And so then that height would appear lower as you walk east
Correct.
because the knee wall will become smaller. Change, is that correct?
Yes, it fades to basically nothing, about 18 inches at the end.
Okay, thank you. That answers my question. Did you want to go on with your direct testimony, or should we continue to have the board ask questions of you, Mr. Intandola?
Unless I didn't cover anything, I think we covered the site, unless Marcia has some, our attorney has.
So I do have a couple of things before you go into the traffic on a couple of, I know we have our planner that will be discussing the exceptions that we're doing for the parking. Can you just mention a little bit testimony on the exception? The requirement is 89 spaces. You mentioned that we have 61, and if we include the bike space, it's 62. But we're also seeking exception from the residential site improvement standards, if you can just discuss that. And then we can discuss the traffic report that you mentioned.
So if we go to the residential site improvement standards, it would be slightly less than your ordinance of 2 per. If we take the 40 times 2 is equal to 80, which is your rate, RSIS, because there is a mix of bedrooms. I believe I did the calculation, comes in at about 75 in total with the mix of bedrooms. But if we construe our residential site improvements strictly, because there is the retail use, in my reading of the residential site improvement standards, they govern to a point as with respect to guidance, because you do have a mixed use building in this instance. It was pure residential, I believe it would apply to the application. So we are not looking to put this in terms of what we typically hear for residential site improvement standards, although it is a guidance. We need basically 80 for the residences, and for the retail at 1 per 200. So that's why we have a parking deficit. We require 89 based on my calculation, and we are providing 61. And we're couching that in terms of basically 1.5 per residential use, irrespective of the bedrooms. I don't know if that answers your question, Ms. Moore.
Yes, and before I get into your testimony on your traffic impact study that we provided, we had an opportunity to review the memorandum dated November 25th from GPI. Do you have any, are the applicant willing to comply with all those conditions and comments that was referenced in Mr. Holloway's report or letter?
Yes, they're all well thought out and applicable comments, and we would not hesitate to conform to his letter.
Sir, if I may ask one question, if we could digress just a bit. When you talked about putting up mirrors, concave mirrors, was that one mirror or two?
I think if you did one on either side,
Okay.
it wouldn't hurt, because we have the inset alcove. They won't get they're a little bit protected, but when we recommend mirrors, the applicant or the ultimate owner of the property has to be diligent that is necessary and needs to be maintained. So I believe that 2 mirrors would be better for both pedestrians. I believe the better view shed you can give, why not? But I believe you should call that out as a condition. So when the zoning code official does his walkthrough on the site and he says, "Where's your mirrors?" as part of your condition of approval, it should be called out. That's just my experience.
Well, I think that you probably would need to have 2 mirrors, because 1 mirror would only get pedestrians from one direction and not the other.
Correct. And I totally agree with that, Mr. Bolden.
So I would say yes, 2 mirrors.
2 it is.
Madam Chairman, I have a question related to the parking and the counting of the bikes in the total. Is that standard practice to include potential bikes when you're asking for this type of concession with the requirements?
Is that directed to me, or is it to the chair?
I think it's actually for our town attorney, Edelson, in that, this is the first that I'm hearing that we're accounting for possible bike parking spots in the total number of parking spaces. So I'm just trying to understand if that's a precedent.
No, we're just highlighting that we have bike parking, but we're not relying on it, I guess, is the better way of characterizing what my testimony is.
Board member, our notices that provided was 61 spaces. We did not include that additional space to the public, whether or not we were providing 61 or 62. It was 61 that was referenced in my notice.
Thank you for clarifying.
Thank you.
Do any other members of the planning board have any other questions for Mr. Intindola?
I have one more question about the landscaping plan. I'd really like to see, it looks like there's no plantings along the Wellesley slide. And now with that wider sidewalk, I think we could get some really nice trees in. So I think you should consider some trees on that side that would, make that whole building facade look nice too, as you're approaching.
Yeah, point well taken. And if we have the opportunity, which I hope we do, that we can put we'll put a few tree pits and maybe a planting area on that side of Wellesley. That's a nice size. The sidewalk there is generous, and we just follow the streetscape, and it could take some landscaping as well. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
I have a couple questions.
Certainly, Mr. Pratt, go ahead.
There's a note on the drawings that the proposed retaining wall was by others. Can you explain?
That's that the ultimate design of the retaining wall, because it's over 4 foot, would need to be designed by how we approach it is that should the applicant be approved, that we would provide to the board's engineer as well as the building department specific calculation of the retaining wall. And that's what we mean by others.
The development is providing that retaining wall. It's just a question of who's engineering it.
Yes, either our office can do it, or we can have like a qualified firm assist the applicant, or there could be a local preference to have an engineering firm that has worked with your reviewing engineer. We do leave that we don't final engineer it until it's approved.
Can you tell us what the 8x8 concrete landing pad is for?
That was
East end.
the genesis of the 8x8 concrete landing pad on that one corner. Came from the prior application, and we carried that forward, that the reviewing engineer wanted a definitive place, a landing pad, if you came out of that rear entrance.
I see. It's for pedestrians exiting to the rear.
That's the intention.
Uh-huh. There's not a door to the rear there?
So at some
Oh,
point,
is that correct?
but maybe Mr. Waga can refresh my memory. That's why that was there, that there was a door on the backside there, so you can come out from a stairwell. That was my understanding. That's why we have it there.
I see. And the dog run area, is that enclosed?
I don't believe there is a dog run unless I have a bad note somewhere. We removed that a couple iterations ago.
It's noted on the site plan that I'm looking at, which I think was provided last month.
Yeah, that is an errant note of a prior submission.
So there is no dog run.
Correct. You have open undulating sidewalk.
I think we might have visited this in the past at one point. Is there any opportunity to retain any of the trees on site?
Well, of course, if we are doing, yes, because what we did was a palisade of arborvitaes, which are now going to be revised if the board's, permission. And we now are taking an opportunity to revisit trees that are removed in the context of the retaining wall and a new landscaping plan. So we do have that opportunity now.
Thank you. That's all my questions, Madam Chair.
I just want to confirm, so that undulating walkway across the back, it won't be open to the public. It won't be open. It will have fencing or a gate of some sort at the Wellesley end, and it will be enclosed except to the narrow walkway that goes to Springfield Avenue on the east end. Is that correct?
It is like a private mews, MEWS, for the residents, if we can characterize it like that. So yes.
Will residents be able to enter it from the Wellesley end?
I believe we do have a fence in that back corner, yes.
So there'll be a gate at that,
Correct.
right? And that'll be accessible by a key card or something?
Yeah, we would bring in a key card system or some other system, or probably the preference would be that it remains locked just for maintenance, that you can open it, and then you would come in from the in building access to get to the rear mews there, to answer your question. I don't believe it, because my experience is that the exterior gate controls, they get damaged, and I would prefer that it remains pretty much locked just for maintenance. But if you want to be a resident to use that back area, you do it by way of the card access system that would be for the entire building.
Right. Well, I would also think that for emergency purposes, you'd want there to be easy egress from that area without going back into the building.
Right, there'll be, similar to what the architect's testimony, that there'll be a push-out gate, one way out. And then if need be, and if the fire department would like it, we would put a Knox box so they can get to it as they see fit.
Okay, thank you. Do any other members of the planning board have any questions for Mr. Intindola?
Yes, I actually have two questions. I
Certainly,
guess the first one is on the architecture plans, I do see an access door from the building leading to that rear. So dead center, there is a double door that does lead to the it's not a dog run anymore, but it does lead to that rear area. So the architecture plans identifies that right now, A1. My questions is that the trees that we were talking about early on, the array of trees, I think it's 51. If I'm correct, they are provided for privacy. What other options would there be that will provide the same type of privacy if you do have to provide a different type of tree?
Well, it's kind of like belt and suspenders, because should we come with the fence itself, and because we are in somewhat of a valley, does provide, with respect to the rear views there, that the fence that would be at the elevation of the back of the garages for the existing residences, that would be your first level of privacy. That's what you would see. And then looking from the backyard area of our project, you would see, as we discussed on that elevation, the sidewalk, retaining wall, embankment, then plantings, and then the fence. Basically, the opacity of the fence would provide that privacy at that level, if that's what we're talking about.
So then if I'm correct, then you don't need to provide that many trees. You can provide some form of better trees that provide a better, I guess, physical view when it blossoms in the spring, or in the fall, or whatever it may be. You don't have to provide that type of tree. You can provide a better set of trees along that path.
Absolutely. And that's what I think the board is requesting, that there's some visual interest in the trees, and let the fence do the work of the fence for the visual screening. And then what you have over the fence, that is something interesting to look at.
Okay, thank you.
If I could just clarify, Mr. Titus, you referenced sheet A1 in the architecture plans showing a set of doors from the eastern fire stair to the rear yard. Is that correct?
I'm looking at A1 now. Look at the proposed ground floor plan. To the top, there is a double door leading from
in the middle of the building.
Yeah, in the middle.
Yeah. Okay. Yes, I see. Right, there's that access, but I don't see any doors from the eastern stair going out to that 8-foot concrete pad.
No, there's none.
Was that in a previous incarnation?
Yes, it was. And then we carried it forward. And I still think it's a good idea to have a little turn area when you come down the alleyway. That's our preference.
What's the width of the alleyway?
I think it was 3.5 was discussed clear at the from the architect's testimony. 3.5 feet to be more clear.
What is the proposed surface to the undulating walkway?
I believe that it would be serviceable with concrete.
Thank you.
I have a question about the operation of the garage door. Will it be card access or remote control?
So I prefer myself that when you drive up, and if you are a resident, you have a radio frequency tag that would open it up upon approach. So then you're not fumbling with the card. It's just basically similar to an Easy Pass system, an RFID system. So then as you approach, either to exit or to enter, the gate will be open and waiting for you within reason. And then for guests, there would be a keypad system to call the person that you are trying to be a guest of, or if there is a need for the, if we find that we're underparked, if the parking demand is not there, then it may be that one or two of the employees can also avail themselves of those spaces when people go to work. So we're looking for shared parking, not that we need it, but we believe that that would be a good idea. So to answer your question, Mr. Holloway, it would be an RFID system that would recognize the car and would be a key fob that you keep in your car.
Thank you. Where would the keypad be located? I'm just trying to anticipate a car being parked there. We can access it from the car, or we have to get out of the car and.
Well, you can use a keypad, or you can just call, right? With the prevalence of cell phones, we're getting away from keypads because they are, you have to maintain them. They have to be on a stanchion that's comfortable for you to use. So I believe that we may just forego a keypad system and make the keypad your cell phone, and you call you know, the apartment that you need to get to or the number, and they can buzz you in as needed. Or so I think that might be a better way to go, because I'm looking to present a plan that is maintainable, and the board has assurance that it will work, and not that I'm giving you the cut sheet specifically for the access system that's to be designed, but we will provide them upon selection, similar to the HVAC.
Will any of the parking spaces be rented out to the general public?
I don't believe that's the intention.
Thank you. No further questions.
Thank you, Mr. Holloway.
Any other? Oh, go
I'm,
ahead.
I'm sorry, I do have a couple of questions on, because we are seeking, we're not providing a loading area, Ms. Intidola, as part of our application. And then another two questions. We're asking for the waive, not to provide the loading area, and respect to the curb cut that we're providing. One of the comments in Mr. Holloway's letter is that it's not encouraged in the PRB zone. So there we are asking to provide a curb cut, and just touch on those two items before you get into your traffic characteristics letter.
Okay, so with respect to the curb cut, you know, spanning the Springfield Avenue sidewalk, of course, we looked at providing access off of Wesley, but in the end, we believe that at some point we have to communicate with Springfield Avenue, just like any other parcel. And what we've done to address that is to minimize our curb cuts. And we are basically removing about, I think it was like 200 feet of open curb cut on Springfield Avenue. And the parking spaces that we show before you on the this utility grading and drainage plan are suggested only. We have to ultimately go to mayor and council to introduce those spaces. But we believe we have minimized the traversing the sidewalk to encourage pedestrian circulation. And with the mirrors and also an effective but unobtrusive auditory and also light system that would let you know that the gate is operable, we believe that we address that issue specifically. If there's any questions on that point, let me know. And then the next question, I believe, was in the queue, was we are not providing a loading space specific as needed per Maplewood. Is our experience is that upon you know, initial construction and a resident, the first few months of residency uptake, that need for a loading space does diminish. And I believe once it's occupied, that you only have the typical churn that you would see in an apartment complex, and that can be managed by getting the apartment loading or moving van day in and out quickly. And as these are apartments, it's not a whole house move. It's you know, couches and a bedroom and whatever else we may have. So these moves go pretty quickly. So I believe if we time it right and do a non-peak hour loading, I think we'll be able to function as any other apartment building on Springfield Avenue.
All right. And then, no, Mr. Holloway had a question?
Could you please further describe the construction logistics, because the construction traffic is shown coming in from Wellesley, and that's where the storm pipes are being proposed also. So I just want to have an idea of the construction sequence off Wellesley.
Right. Ultimately, I am not the contractor, but I will say this, that the way that our construction entrance is, it would be logical that we start to the east and work our way west, you know, and then we start on that one side and we work our way to Wellesley. But that, you know, this type of construction, after the approval process, goes fairly quickly. It's footings, steel, and fit out. So the site, that tracking area will be not used for long. I would be surprised if it's used after we get the footings done. If it's used more than another, footings would take about 5 weeks. after excavation. So we're at 10 weeks. So basically that Wesley exit would probably be done in about 12 weeks because then the steel will start going up and you couldn't get a truck through because of the head clearance. I don't know if that answers your question, but that's how I envision it.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to be careful that there was no damage to the storm system. So that was my biggest concern. We may need a TV inspection before and after the storm drains out there.
Again, well advised again, Mr. Holloway. We'll take that into account.
Chaz, is there, I'm literally just responding to what you're saying, but in my mind, I'm thinking of the sewer system more than the stormwater management. Have you looked at that? And is there, because we have old system obviously, and wondering if there's, with 40 units, if there's any improvements to that system being proposed. And excuse me for my ignorance on this, because I just thought of it, and so I haven't looked through the plans but I didn't want to let it go unasked. So
no specific comments. It's not that atypical for the construction on Springfield Avenue. We just did one further down the street for a commercial establishment. It's a little bit complicated on digging up Springfield Avenue, but the capacity seems to be there.
I'm just going to zoom in on the sewer connection.
Yeah. My concern is because we are literally spending hundreds of thousands of dollars right now to upgrade this system on Boyden Avenue because of issues with too much usage now that wasn't intended and into this old system. And I don't want to run into the same thing a couple years from now that we're getting asked on the township committee to have a capital budget request for $400,000 to improve this because we allowed for 40 more units on top of this many units and this many units. And typically in a redevelopment zone, that's a developer's agreement portion. But I don't want it to go unanswered before this comes to any kind of conclusion. So
I understood. The connections, we could ask the applicant to supply some more information, but the main reason for the connection is to how they core drill it and they connect to it.
Right, but is there any way to analyze what the usage of that would be, whether or not that's something that we need this applicant to address if he's adding to, taxing the system that's already there to such an extent that the township then has to, a few years from now, take the burden to fix the issue of more use than it was intended to have.
No, I understand the question. The utility department will have a chance to take a look at it, and also the engineering department for the road opening permit required for the connection. And we can also rely or look back on the engineer should talk about the NJDEP permit that may be required.
Yeah, I just don't want it to slip by. I'm sorry, Mr. I just don't want it to get lost and then end up being what we've experienced with other developments in the past to our detriment financially.
Yes, I will discuss it with the applicant's engineer, and we will look at this matter a little bit further, but the actual connection is appropriate for this type of design.
Thank you.
Madam Chairwoman, I have one question, I guess, regarding the retail area. And that is for the delivery of inventory, stock, or whatever, however you want to call it. How does the developer see that being done? I mean, during what hours would they be delivering product for these retail facilities?
So what we envision is that once you do your fit out for whatever retail it may be, that most retail is supported by a panel van delivery, like a UPS truck or a FedEx truck, or the larger, like say an Amazon delivery vehicle. I don't think we would need the support of a larger truck unless it was specifically a chain that their logistics go to larger trucks. But we would respectfully submit to the board that this would be neighborhood retail. What could be a dry cleaning pickup, not a plant, or something of that nature. So I don't believe we need to support it with the next level vehicle, and it can be supported with a typical parcel van that is already, making deliveries on Springfield Avenue. And they would avail them to an on-street parking space to make their delivery as any other retail business on Springfield Ave.
Well, understood, but I guess I'm wondering as to what time of day would these be done? Because to be honest, from the architectural drawings, even with a microscope, I really can't make out what the dimensions are to anticipate what the square footage is.
Well, the square footage is about 1,700 square foot, and they
Total?
Total, yes.
Approximately 1726 for the two proposed spaces.
So it's like would be 800 per, which really
Exactly,
lends itself
15.
to neighborhood retail. I don't. The demising wall between the two may change a little bit, but we're figuring about 800 each, 850 each, which is not, basically as we know that retail uses are diminishing. So we hope that this size will provide a store of interest for the residents of Maplewood.
So your deliveries would be before 8 and after 5, or anytime during the day?
I believe that for a small retail like this, it's depends on what you're selling, of course, right? I don't believe we're going for a food use, which would have an early AM delivery. We're really looking to, I don't know, I can't vouch for the ultimate retail that's going to there, but if there's a delivery restriction that is compatible with Springfield Avenue and the residents, I believe that any reasonable delivery time would be appropriate because we're not providing a loading space. So that would be a reasonable condition to look at. And if it was to be that, loading would be, from my experience, Springfield Avenue, I would say loading could be done in the AM early from say 6 to 9. Then you have a blackout period, and then you can do from 10 to 12. Then you have another blackout period, and then you do from let's say 2 to 4, and then another blackout period. So you're trying to intermingle with the commuter and school pickup times in the neighborhood, so that we would, if there's a set times that the board would want to prescribe, I believe that would be a reasonable condition.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Intadola, last but not least, you had an opportunity to provide a traffic characteristic letter. Have you had the opportunity to evaluate this project and the impact it may have on the traffic in the surrounding areas?
Yeah, I think from the board's perspective, we've couched some of the traffic testimony in terms of the logistics of how the site would operate with respect to parking. Basically, for this type of use, in total, what Standard Institute of Transportation Engineers trip generation is, the ITE, I think you're familiar with. The total for the AM trip generation during the morning, weekday morning, would be 34. Which would be 12 to enter and 22 to exit. The PM on a weekday would be 36. Basically the same trips that left, 22 to return and 14 to exit. And then Saturday, similar magnitude, but it's split evenly at 15 and 15 in the peak hour for a total of 30. So that's what we would add new. we didn't take any credit for the resumption of the H&R Block or whatever use you can make. You can reuse the existing sales shack that's there. I don't believe that's a fair comparison, so we didn't. So we were adding basically those trips to the network on Springfield Avenue, and I believe that Springfield Avenue, with its I believe its excellent design of the the center lane, refuge lane, will operate well for this site specifically. And because the retail is limited, most of that will be neighborhood traffic, walk-up traffic. So I don't believe it's a component in and of itself, but we did account for it. So basically, for that, I believe that the traffic here will complement Springfield Avenue and would actually be a lesser trip generator than the resumption of a more intense retail use. So it basically is self-mitigating in a sense that is a lesser trip generator and would be compatible with the neighborhood. And you could avail yourself of transit that is available on Springfield Avenue. It's a well served area. The bus garage is down the street, many connections for the North Jersey area, and then down to more transit connections down in downtown Newark. So it works well, and we hope that people are not so car dependent, but we are prepared to park them if we have to. So I believe that the combination will, what we're proposing from the traffic characteristics of this project will be assimilated into the Springfield Avenue corridor, and will meet the intention of the pedestrian centered zoning that we were trying to work our way into. So I think that complements that as well. So I don't think there's going to be much of an impact here, and I think the driveway will work well. We'll have a state-of-the-art access system that will have minimal impediment to pedestrians and also service the building in an efficient manner. So that's how I would characterize the traffic that we're proposing that's associated with the site. And I want to add another thing is that because the way we designed the sidewalk, we have a nice generous sidewalk of about 13 feet clear along Springfield Avenue, which allows you to, if you would want, and if it's permitted, I don't know offhand, that you could do cafe tables out there if needed, or even on the side of Wellesley to service that area. So that is, if the grades work, because it's weird being on a slant, so it doesn't quite work there, but it works well on Springfield Avenue. And this sidewalk does provide for that. So that, I think that also, instead of having like a 6-foot sidewalk on a planting bed, we have a nice broad shoulder sidewalk to accommodate it, to mesh with the pedestrian demand as well. So that's how we look at the traffic from this project.
If I heard you correctly, you said you would be able on along Wellesley to have outdoor seating?
Well, I took that back a little bit.
Do you mean that for pedestrians or for something else?
No, if in an ideal, like, we would do well if we had a small like cafe in one of our retail uses, and then people have bistro tables out front there. And if you, and as I made my comments extemporaneously, I noted that the grades don't quite work well for Wellesley, but we do have a nice pedestrian plaza there.
Okay. Just wanted to clarify. I wasn't sure if I heard you correctly. Thank you.
I have no further questions of this witness.
Thank you. Are there any other members of the planning board who have any questions for Mr. Inchindola? All right, seeing none. This is an opportunity for members of the public to ask their questions of Mr. Inchindola regarding his testimony. If you would like to ask a question, please use the raise your hand function, and we will endeavor to maintain this in an orderly fashion. Ms. Stephanie Scott, please correct me if I have your name wrong, and give us your address, please, and then you're welcome to ask your question.
Yep. Stephanie Scott, 24 Amherst Court in Maplewood. And my question is, there seem to be some assumptions being made about the back view and the fence height based on a belief that all of the lots, residential lots, have garages in the back that would serve as a barrier. Mr. Antidola, are you aware that not all of the lots have garages in the back?
I'm aware of that, and I believe in my direct testimony, I said about maybe 40% of the rear yard views are encumbered by the garages. So the 60% is open, and I believe that's a fair assessment of that. So I didn't mean to mischaracterize that, but that's what I provided my direct testimony.
Okay. And then what is the height of the proposed trees, replacement trees at their maximum? Let's assume they are arborvitae versus the rear of the building.
So I don't believe we struck a line to that, but I believe that if the trees were, like, if I may go back to that, maybe I can provide your answer in the section. So the top of our section here, we would have the trees that would be in here. We've consumed 5 feet, so there would be 15 feet. We would be about 115. And I don't have the elevation on the site plan for the proposed building because we typically don't do that. But I believe that we would probably be just midway. This is just from recollection, with the 20-foot tree, probably midway or 3/4 way to Mr. Waga's first run of windows.
The first run of windows on the first floor?
On the residential first floor, yes.
Okay, so there would be 2 other floors or 1 other floor with
No,
windows exposed?
It's parking and resident 1, resident 2.
So the second floor would be exposed to the back?
Yeah, that's based on just on recollection of Mr. Waga's testimony, but I think that's where we would be at.
Okay. And is there an assessment or knowledge of the amount of sunlight in that planting space back there? I mean, I happen to know it's challenging right now to even grow tomatoes in those back lots because basically the trees that are there now block the southern exposure and the line of the sun. So when a building goes up of that height, I would imagine that the sun that would be required to grow most trees would be blocked from the back of the building. Is there any option for shade trees that would be enough of a height to create a barrier, a suitable barrier for residents?
Yeah, so that is what the board's direction that we're taking, that we modify our landscape plan to make some more variable landscaping for both the residents on Amherst as well as from the apartment side. So yes, there's an opportunity to come up with a species that would be compatible to the sunlight that's there now or in the future. But ultimately that would be when we have the modified landscape plan that would be subject to the township's review to be acceptable and in keeping of what they're suggested is in this hearing.
And just for clarification, Ms. Scott, when you say shade trees, if I'm not mistaken, you're thinking about trees that thrive in shade as opposed to
Correct.
trees that provide shade?
Yes, trees that will be able to thrive in shade because the building will likely block all of the light, if not most.
Point taken.
And then for the retaining wall, you know, the grade varies across the lot, but is that retaining wall going to have any kind of drainage coming out? So whatever's permeable there in the planting strip, or that's running off of the grade, which is steep on one side, will go through the retaining wall, or what is the drainage situation with the retaining wall?
So if I could take you through how I understand the grades, like say you're up on Amherst, right? And you have runoff from one of the driveways on Amherst, and then it traverses across the way because that's the grades work. And it
Yep.
finds their way to the back of our fence, then down to the retaining wall. What we would provide is, slopes that are, erosion resistant, or whatever controls we would need to prevent that from happening. And then the retaining wall itself, it's kind of like it's a drainage system, because when you build a retaining wall, you have the retaining wall and you pack it with gravel in the actual stone cells. So that's like for us, that's like almost like a drainage structure is the way I characterize it. And that collects the water in the cells of the retaining wall blocks. And typically we would put a footer drain or a perforated pipe at the bottom that helps conduct the water that found its way through the gravel pack behind the retaining wall and is conducted away and away from the residents. So that's accounted for.
Okay, good. I'm asking because there's a lot of erosion on
Right.
parts of that hill right now.
Correct. And so we're bringing the grade up a little bit with the retaining wall, and then the grade that's left, we would, in the landscape plan, we would, take measures that the erosion does not occur. That's one of the points of the retaining wall.
All right. So all the questions I have.
Thank you. And just in a related question, I would assume that the plantings will also help mitigate the effects of erosion. Is that correct, Mr. Antondola?
Yes. We can look for species that are, can hold their roots well. And so the answer would be yes.
Great, thank you. Mr. Schubart, if you would please correct me if I have your name wrong, and more importantly, share your address with us before you ask your question.
Of course, thank you. It's Jeffrey Schubart, 12 Wellesley Road.
Thank you.
Of course. There was testimony that the traffic patterns would complement Springfield Avenue. This is the AM and PM trip generation. Has the same study been done for what kind of traffic will be on Wellesley and Amherst, and whether that will complement those roads as well? I'm concerned that while it might be appropriate for Springfield, that a lot of these people coming out are going to zoom up Wellesley to get to Tuscan and out to where they're going in a very residential neighborhood, which has approximately 20 school-age children on it.
So if we were to talk about that, right? So if we look at the AM peak when people are going to work, right? So we have 22 exiting vehicles. So say if, and this is all hypothetical and on the fly, because I don't believe we needed to look at the impact on the side streets, because unless you work in the neighborhood, like at someone's house office or home office, why would you need to be there? But moving on, so of the 22 exiting, say if we round that to 25, just so I can, or 22 is fine. So even if 7 vehicles go back around for whatever reason, that they couldn't use so it would be, in my mind, and it would be the left turning vehicle coming out of our site that would maybe want to make a right and go back around, right? So how many vehicles would that be? So then we know that the way Springfield Avenue is striped, it has that center lane that is excellent for left turning vehicles as a refuge lane. It's called it's a double left movement with the refuge lane, and that's recognized by traffic engineers as a way of encouraging that, and it does. So even if there was 7 vehicles making the left out, and they preferred to make a right out, you maybe of those 7 that would prefer to not make the left, make the right, maybe 4 would go back around to Amherst. So I don't believe that is a heavy number of vehicles. And to put it into context, when you do a traffic study, you may have heard that significant volumes are to be encountered and studied in depth when you have 100 trips. Even our gross total of like 35 and 30 is 2/3 less of what you consider to be significant traffic generator. So I believe for those reasons, there would not be a need to use Wellesley and Amherst to circulate. I just don't see the need for it in this particular project.
Okay. I mean, as a resident, I find that lots of people do. It is a very trafficked area because of its proximity to Springfield. And I think that, I know you did it off the cuff, but I think you're underestimating the amount of people that will turn right and then turn right and go up Wellesley to get to Tuscan, to get down to downtown Maplewood. That's where the police go, right? They go up and down Tuscan, and that's what a lot of people do, and they follow that road and they cut through this, and it's already my assessment, not the safest of roads, and I think we're adding to it here. But I appreciate the fact that you had to do that off the cuff. I don't have any further questions.
Okay, thank you. Do any other members of the public? Oh, yes. Chris Mullen, please give us your address and ask your question.
Yes, hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Excellent. Chris Mullen, I live at 6 Amherst Court. Just jumping off of the last question, the right-hand turn and right-hand turn up Wellesley to Tuscan is actually the most direct path to the train station, which is why there is the assumption that a majority of people commuting would actually take that path. It would be by far the fastest way for them to get to the train station, especially if they are rushing. And given the number of school children at that same time, it is a significant concern of the number of trips that would increase because of that. So do you still feel that it's not worth doing a study on Wellesley?
I don't characterize it. First of all, you're making an assumptive statement that I don't believe safety is worth looking at. So I take exception to that. But as a resident's perspective, I would say to you that one additional car is unacceptable, right? So if we work from that premise, of course, we believe that traffic needs to be accounted for and managed for our project. And we would put that in the context if there was a more extensive neighborhood retail, would have more trip generators, more vehicle trip generation. We believe that this on balance is with the number of units and the trip generation in the low to mid 30s total, we believe that that could be assimilated even to the most logical route to the train station, because not everyone will avail themselves of driving to the train station. Some will take the bus that takes you to the train station, or we'll find another means to get to work. So not all those trips will also go back behind our site to get to the train station, although it probably is the most logical route. And we understand safety is a primary concern for anyone, but we are confident, I am confident, that the trip generation associated with this order of magnitude project is almost self-policing, as it's not a retail use that can drive much more traffic.
Okay, but it does drive traffic specifically at the times that school would be getting into session as well, given commuter traffic.
Well, everyone, well, to answer that question, school traffic is slightly before and out of phase with commuter traffic. It's just a little bit more. What I'm saying is that it's just a little bit before. Not knowing specifically for Maplewood, but most grammar schools, middle schools that would, be children would be walking. They are like in the 8:10 arrival time. I might be wrong. And then commuters are not exactly, they're slightly out of phase with that when it's so local, right? And then mostly you may have a parent driving, a person that lived there, if they had a child, would be driving their kid to school anyway. So they would be in their vested interest to participate in safe driving practices for the school that they're going to as well.
Mm-hmm.
There's that element as well, that they would be vested in the community to drive within the context of all DMV regulations.
Okay. On page 3 of the document that you're looking at, I believe, is where the dog park is, or dog run is still shown. Is the undulating walkway now going the entire length of the back, or what would that space be used for?
As related, there was an errant note for the dog park, and I think we had touched upon that during my direct testimony.
Correct.
And basically, the end of the walkway would be about 7/8 down the run of the building, and would end about at the east, so it goes west to east, and it ends at the end there.
Okay, so the end of the walkway hasn't changed. What is at that end, or the rest of that space then?
It would be a grassed area.
Okay. And in a prior meeting, it was stated that the retaining wall would not be placed behind lot 101 because of, I believe, egress to the lot to the east. I believe that was why, but can you clarify for me, this is the far east side, can you clarify how that retaining wall will end and what is being done to make sure that the hill at that stage is structurally sound?
So, the best way I can describe it is like, you ever think about plate tectonics, and there's a subduction plate that goes down?
Mm-hmm.
That's how the end of the retaining wall goes down. It gets buried, and then where we can get the appropriate slope, we just, for lack of a better word, we feather out the grades that in a way that's acceptable. So that's how we end it and stabilize it.
Okay, so behind lot 101, the far east side, it would not be a right angle at the property. It would have the retaining wall subducting under a slope. That would the slope be the same length that it currently is?
No, the way we have it, I think we have bottom of wall is 107, I think, and the top of wall is like 108. So it dies down. We have a small L, I believe, in the retaining wall. I'm just trying to look in it closely.
Mm-hmm.
And then right, there's a, so the differential is 108 to 107. So it's about a foot and a quarter, and that's what's left of the retaining wall. Then it dies out.
And that L shape will help ensure that my concern about this is the frame garage behind it.
Yes.
Being supported structurally in the same way that the amount of earth that is there currently supports it.
Yeah, I think in the end, you might have a better situation because you'll have the structure of the wall that will stabilize it.
The trees behind it will be gone, however, correct?
Yes and no, because if we can salvage some now in a revisited landscaping plan, most likely, because there's a grouping of trees there at the frame garage, but there might be some that it can be salvaged.
Okay. How will the hill be structurally enforced during the construction of that retaining wall?
When we bring I think we have a soil conservation plan that has to be reviewed by Hudson Essex Passaic Soil, and we are providing all those typical details during construction that would be appropriate during that time.
Okay, but there's no plan right now. It would be done as after approval?
No, we have in our package a soil conservation plan. It's in it, so we've already accounted for it, and then should we be approved, we then update it, because sometimes between initial submission and final submission, they change their notes slightly, and then we just check in with them, see if their notes change, and then we submit the soil conservation plan.
And the soil conservation plan is what shows how everything will be structurally kept safe during the construction?
Correct.
Okay. Next question I had was the slope of the 5-foot buffer once the retaining wall is in place. And I think you partially talked to that as far as the height goes, but what does that slope look like?
It varies, but I like to limit it to no more than a 1-on-3 slope. I prefer a 1-on-2, and we try and make that work for the majority to be between 1-on-2 and 1-on-3. So for every foot you walk, it goes up the 3 foot. So that's basically what we're trying to get, which is depending on the soil, goes to its natural angle of repose, so it doesn't roll down the hill.
Okay. And how does that differ with what it is right now?
It would be, I think because we're making the retaining wall to catch grade, it would be less actually.
Okay, great. For the fencing, regardless of the material, or maybe that would change things, how would it be installed and anchored? I ask this specifically because the temporary fence that was put up was actually drilled directly into our fence.
Yeah, I don't have any knowledge of the temporary fence.
Yeah, so I'm curious at how the new fence would be installed so that doesn't happen again.
So basically what we do is typically, and it would be applied here, is that we typically I tend to speak construction guide, but you strike a line about 6 inches off the property line. You post hole dig, set your concrete, set your posts at 6 feet, and then set your fence sections accordingly.
Okay. And it could be freestanding from other fences or other structures.
Oh, yeah, that's my point. When you do 6 inches into the property line, you give up to 6 inches. So, but then there's no issue. You don't have any issue on purchase survey, or there's no encroachment. Should the rear homes be sold, we're off your property line clearly.
Makes sense. Does the planned fence have any kind of gap in the, I'm sorry, I don't know fencing terminology, in the, not the posts, but the parts of the fence?
So no, so we are having a vigorous debate about what kind of fence, and basically the applicant, whatever the recommendation of Maplewood is, that's the fence we're going to put up. So,
all right.
So in terms of section gaps, the much maligned PVC fence does not have gaps, only on the top, only on the bottom where there's the airspace, which we testified to. We tried to hide that with an overburn, and I think it worked well. But whatever fence it is, it would be, the ultimate style and aesthetic would be at the direction of the Standing Maplewood Committee that speaks about this thing. And I think they have a recommendation on the table for a wood fence, which we would oblige.
Okay. And I guess I'm asking just not only for aesthetics, but also for soil erosion and drainage, for water getting through the bottom of the fence as opposed to backing up behind it.
Right. So typically fences at fence lines, because you build up the debris over years and years and years and years, we would have a fence with the air gap that would avoid that, but we cannot vouch for how our backdoor neighbors, may, whatever, leaves build up. It's not anybody's intention to do that, but we do provide the drainage conduit for that as needed.
And so it would be the maintenance of the backside of that fence would fall on the backyard neighbors. Is that correct?
No. I mean, on the property line, yes, but we're off the property line into our yard anyway. So to what margin do you take that into the rear yards? I don't know.
Sorry, how about cleaning, things like that?
Yeah, if you build a fence and it's not, so we address this, is that basically the fence is part of the condition of approval, and it needs to be maintained just like any other feature and like any other property owner in Maplewood. It has to be maintained in good repair.
I'm trying to figure out how someone would get up to the level of the fence to clean it, and especially clean the back side of it that is facing the residential units, given the retaining wall, the the plantings, the trees, and then a 4 or 5, however high foot fence.
So, you can detach the fence section, bring it down back into the future muse, do whatever you have to do. If it's a wood fence, there is minimal opportunity or need to maintain it because it is a wood natural product. Sometimes, I don't want to go on about fencing. Sometimes the PVC fence, if the conditions are right, will mildew and they need to be bleach washed every once in a while. But I don't believe that's going to be the situation here if we go with the recommendation of the Township of Maplewood.
Okay.
Mr. Milan, if I may ask, do you have several other questions? Because we do have a number of other people who have questions as well, and I was going to give them an opportunity unless you just have one or two more.
I do have a number of other questions. So I'm happy to wait my turn.
That would be great. Just please get back in the queue. Nicole Wallace, please share your role with us and ask your question.
Okay. Hi, Nicole Wallace. I'm with Springfield Avenue Partnership. I just wanted to inquire about the cars coming out of the garage onto Springfield Avenue and queuing up to make a left turn. I know when I try to make left turns at unsignaled intersections onto Springfield Avenue, you have to creep out into the road, in this case, creeping out, sitting on the sidewalk and wait and wait and wait and creep out a little more and wait until you can make the left turn. At times when many cars are leaving the building at once, you could get a line of cars waiting to get out, creeping out, sitting on the sidewalk to make that left turn. So I want to know if you looked at that situation and how that would impact pedestrian access on the sidewalk.
Yeah, so specifically to the left turning movements, what we do have is the advantage of the center shared island that's striped. And the function of that is you negotiate one side of Springfield Ave traffic, which would be the westbound side. And then you can wait for a gap for the eastbound side in that center median. That's the purpose of it. So you're really only crossing half of Springfield Avenue traffic at any time. Unfortunately, when you go to an unsignalized intersection, you don't have the benefit of that. You have to wait for gaps on both sides. But for our mid-block area, we have the benefit of that center island that's striped to refuge and then continue our left-hand turn. So it kind of works well for us.
Okay, thank you.
Did you have any other questions?
No, not right at this moment.
Okay, thank you. Deborah Lyons, please go ahead with your question.
Hi, I just wanted to follow up with something on the trees that Mr. Fryatt and Mr. Titus talked about. And that is, I'm not quite certain what's the impetus for removing the mature trees on the site, because given the elevation with the residents, mature trees would provide screening from their windows, and lines of arborvitae would not provide any screening for them. Is it because you can't construct the berm with the trees? And the other part of that question is, some trees have already been removed from the site. And do you know if they were of sufficient caliber to trigger the tree permit process? And was that done?
To the second part of your first question, I'm not aware of that. You know, the caliper and the tree removal, so I don't know. And then as we have testified that if we have the opportunity to preserve some trees in a landscape plan that may be modified, we would try to preserve as many of the older trees as possible.
Okay. And I have one other question about parking. You talked about traffic generation, but as a practical matter, people drive to Springfield Avenue. You anticipate for 1,700 square feet of retail, how many street parking spots you would need? And do you think the street parking is sufficient for that?
So in the area, we are creating a number of spaces, which ultimately would be under the auspices of the Township of Maplewood to install, or they may have other reasons for using it right away. But we believe that the spaces that we're bringing back, that were part of the curb cuts for the used car dealership and the H&R Block, that it's almost like self-parking with respect to the retail on street.
I'm sorry, so you think that in terms of those two retail spaces, whatever you regain from taking out the curb cuts will be sufficient for those spaces?
Right. So if we look at it, we have it striped out for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 on-street spacings, 9 on-street spaces, which would be what the retail demand is. I think it's 8 when you divide it by 200.
Okay, thank you.
And next we have Dave Helmkamp. Please share your address and question.
Hi, it's Dave Helmkamp. It's 571 Prospect Street. And my question is regarding the traffic flow again in connection with parking. You had mentioned that the Springfield Avenue entry seemed preferable to Wesley Road. And I'm wondering whether, or what the basis for that was, and whether a Wesley Road exit with a left turn only had been considered.
Well, what we like about Springfield Avenue, it's at grade, so it gives me maximum visibility. And also this section of Springfield Avenue where we have it located, to me, with the corner clearance is the optimal location for the access, and also works well with the adjoining separation of the driveways to the east. So if we were to look into all those factors and put it all together, we believe that where we have optimized the driveway, it probably works best. Because, and you also have the grade on Wesley that, it's okay for access, but I prefer to have a flatter driveway, which Springfield Avenue affords us.
Mm-hmm. Were there any other negative aspects to Wesley Road?
I just believe it's awkward.
Mm-hmm.
This is where, I'm not saying that it's magic, is that if you look at all the constraints that you have, where we have the Springfield Avenue driveway for us makes the best sense, because it also gives you enough time to react if you're a pedestrian, if you're walking along the building, to almost like maximum reaction to a vehicle entering and exit at the site.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. That's my only question.
Okay. Mr. Milan, if you would like to resume with your questions, you're welcome to go ahead.
Sure, thank you very much. And 6 Amherst Court again, just in case it's needed for the record.
Thank you.
You bet. So I think this is really kind of building on a lot of what we talked about with the trees tonight. And we do have in the Maplewood Code 271-57.b.2, whenever feasible, natural vegetation shall be retained and protected. You also brought up mentioned the comment of as much screening as possible, as soon as possible. And I think the best answer to that is there are mature trees that are there that would provide as much screening as possible, as soon as possible, because there is zero work required to build them up, if that makes sense. And so we've talked about keeping these trees in place where possible, or where feasible. And I guess, are there any trees that are there that interfere with the actual footprint of the building? Or are all of the trees that are being removed to create a private walkway for residents?
The function of the modification of the slope on where the trees are planted is really just to provide some amenity for the residents to, have a little green space. And so I think we're providing that.
Do the trees not count as a green space though? Which would be not just for the residents, but for residents and the surrounding community?
I don't know how to answer that question, because I answered the question.
I'm not sure how you answered it, sorry. The
function of the backspace is to provide some green space. And we are, based on the direction of the board, we are going to revisit to see if we can salvage any of the mature trees along our retaining wall run. So I think that kind of answers the question.
Okay, and I guess my question is, that green space would be private for residents. Is that correct?
It's like anybody else's backyard.
Whereas the current green space, the trees, is enjoyed by the neighboring residents as well, especially given it is taller than the building. It would also be enjoyed by everyone who walks by.
As much as I enjoy the rapier wit of your questions, I believe I answered the question several times, is that we will try to preserve the trees as much as possible. That is our intent, based on the direction of the board. I think I've answered that question 4 times, different versions of it.
Sure. The as best as possible, I guess, is what I'm trying to figure out. Is as best as possible, meaning still preserving a private walkway, or is as best as possible, meaning reconsidering a private walkway as well?
I don't even know what you're saying to me anymore. What I'm saying is that when I say as best as possible, revisit the needs of the retaining wall, mature trees, and trying to preserve as many trees as possible. That is my intention when I say the phrase as best as possible.
I think the answer, the question is that he would work with the engineer and revisit that issue. I think that's why we said we've answered the question several times, so.
Sure. The traffic sight lines, the sight triangles, they assume that no cars are parked on the street. Is that correct?
The sight lines are done in accordance with the prevailing AASHTO and UTCD guidelines.
Sorry, let me turn up my volume. I did not quite hear you. I apologize. What was that?
The sight lines as presented on the plan are in accordance with the AASHTO and MUTCD guidelines to establish sight lines for the location in question.
Okay. I'll end my questions here.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Can you hear me?
Oh, you said you ended your questions? Okay, I could not hear you.
Yeah, I said I will end my questions here.
Thank you. Are there any other members of the public who have any questions for Mr. Intindola regarding his testimony? If so, please use the raise your hand function. And if you cannot use the raise your hand function, then please feel free to speak up now. I don't see anyone who has any other questions. So Ms. Moore, does that conclude Mr. Intindola's testimony? I understand you have another witness, is that correct?
Yes, that does include Mr. Intindola's questioning tonight, Madam Chair. Brian, your screen is still on. You can close that out.
Thank you.
So Ms. Moore, would you like to proceed with your next witness?
At this time, we'd like to bring our planner, John McDonough.
Certainly. There he is.
Hi, everyone.
Hi. Mr. McDonough, do you swear that the testimony you're going to give this evening will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Mr. McDonough, can you give the board your background, your educational background at what license venue you hold?
Sure. My education comes from Rutgers. I have a license in professional planning here in the state of New Jersey. That license is current and in good standing. I also have the national certification from the American Institute of Certified Planners. That's also current and in good standing. And then lastly, although it's not my primary role here this evening, but I did make mention of it, that I'm also a licensed landscape architect in the state of New Jersey. And it sounds like I may be doing a landscape plan here as well. That license is current and in good standing also.
Great, thank you. We're happy to have you as an expert witness.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
So, Mr. McDonough, if you can just go through the planning that's before this board, we've mentioned throughout our testimony that we're seeking certain variances for side yard and front yard, as well as certain exceptions. If you can just walk through the board, those planning and the justification for them.
Sure thing. It's been a long road to get here. The good news, I think, is that the relief where the applicant has now landed, based on this very interactive process with the board and with the public, is very minor in terms of where the applicant has actually landed in terms of the relief sought here. And we'll go through the list and the rationale for all of them. But again, this has been a highly interactive process, which is exactly what the Supreme Court of New Jersey says the process should be. The board, public gives comments. The board has done a great job here, as they always do, and the public as well. An applicant that responds and has come back with a revised plan. Remember, we started, I think it was 2 years ago, with a plan that was 4 stories. We're now down to 3 stories, significantly scaled back over the plan where we had initially started. So again, this has been a process where there has been great movement on the part of the applicant to repurpose what I think we can all agree is a site that could use some help. A site that certainly has been stagnant and underutilized in a very prominent location in the community here. And I think we can also agree that any investment in this site is certainly a good thing for everybody involved. That said, we are here seeking relief from the PRB, Pedestrian Retail Business District. It is a relatively new zone here in the community, and I guess we'll say the fruits of that zone has already manifested along the corridor out there. We are seeing transforming nature of Springfield as a result of these newer projects that have come online subsequent to that zoning. Maplewood has always been cutting edge with the zoning. We saw it earlier this evening with the ADU, and that's exactly what this PRB zone will do as well, or has been doing. The good news is that the applicant is here with a plan that is fully conforming from a use standpoint. The applicant is not seeking any relief in terms of a permitted mixed-use development. This is going to be a very nice, very attractive development along the corridor. Again, there's been some very nice movement back and forth, with the board giving a lot of good comments about the architectural look of this very prominent site along the corridor. And we'll start by reminding the board that this is in fact a zone where a number of things could actually occur here. So here in the PRB zone, we could have things here like retail businesses, financial institutions. We could have eat-in or take-out restaurants here. Think of, let's say, Buffalo Wild Wings. We're just coming off of the Super Bowl. So it is a site that is certainly inviting of activity here. And from a planning standpoint, I see residential against residential as being more benign than if we were to have an active commercial use backing up to those properties. And I know our neighbors on the backside there are very sensitive to what that will ultimately look like at the end. And I think our applicant here has made a commitment to give great care to that in the back as well, bearing in mind that, again, if we had a purely commercial use on this zone, which is something that is allowed, you get the service court in the back, the noise, the banging, the clanging, the odors, the like. So again, I see this as a better zoning alternative. Again, the applicant not seeking any relief for what we're looking at in the back of the site there in terms of the relationship to the neighbors, the height of the building in the back, the setback and the like are all in conformance. Professional offices, instructional businesses, social fraternal clubs, lodges, union halls, alternate treatment centers, those type of things could all manifest on this particular property. So I would offer that, again, in consideration of the many different types of uses that are allowed here, this residential against residential is in fact a very good thing. With that, I would like to just give the board a little orientation as to some of the things I looked at when I looked at this particular piece of property here. And with the board's permission or the chair's permission, I'm wondering if I could just share screen just to, again, bring forth some very basic points from a planning standpoint.
Certainly. Ms. Miller, would you please give Mr. McDonough, you're ahead of me. Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So just a couple of core facts from a planning standpoint to help the board with orientation. And I don't know if this has or needs to be marked into evidence, but it will be a 7-page exhibit.
So we can have that marked as A3, and that was provided prior to the last meeting to Ms. Lewis as an exhibit. So we can have that marked as A3 as John McDonough's planning testimony.
Okay. And you can see in the lower left-hand portion here, these were actually prepared in January 7th, 2018. So they've been out there for a while. I have some piles and piles of these plans or these exhibits here for when we were live. Now we're digital. So here we go. We're looking at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 tax lots identified as block 30.04, lots 127, 29, 135, 137, and 140. In aggregate, this assemblage of lots by our applicant here is substantially oversized in the context of the zone scheme. 36,450 square feet approximately is more than 14 times the zoning requirement here. So you certainly could have a lot of little things going on here as well that could have impact on those homes on Amherst as well. But the applicant is looking to plan this development as one very nice, unified, integrated, I'll say master plan development that will have a very nice cohesive feel to it. Again, with relatively modest relief in terms of where we have finally landed here. We do have frontage on 2 streets, on Wesley and also Wellesley rather, and on Springfield Avenue. The developed condition of the property, what you see in this photograph is basically the way the property has sat in its stagnant condition, predominantly parking, with the smaller building on one of the lots, and then of course the former H&R Block on another. You do get a sense, importantly, of the established or prevailing front setback. The applicant does need relief for a front setback here, but you can see on both sides of the street, we have a pretty good street wall effect that has happened, and the applicant is essentially following that. I also like the setback relief because it is maintaining separation from those homes back on the Amherst side. So again, anything that can pull away from that side of the property in favor of relief on the Springfield side, I think clearly goes towards the intent of the C2 zoning criteria as a better zoning alternative. This next slide is something we see under the Mod 4 land use classification system, and it's color-coded simply to indicate our divide between residential land uses and non-residential land uses. We have a pretty good band of, I'll say red here, which is non-residential, running up and down Springfield. We have seen now multifamily residential coming in as part of mixed-use development, consistent with the zoning, which certainly on this particular lot is going to provide for a very nice transition from the lower density residential to the non-residential commercial core along Springfield. Whenever we can introduce, I'll say multifamily residential as a transitional use between lower density residential and non-residential development, that's a good thing from a planning standpoint. And your zoning reflects that, and the plan here reflects that as well. So the next frame simply shows the zoning, which is consistent with, I'll say, the existing use. The fact that we are looking at a predominantly commercial corridor that is looking for the infusion of residential as well. This is where the PRB zone goes. The proposed use, again, is a permitted use in the zone district. We took some photos back in, I think we went out there and actually in the beginning of 2019. But the key point is here we are, hard to believe, 2 years later, and the condition of the property is generally the same in that vacant condition. And that's really just what these last 3 slides show there. Again, you get a sense of those dwellings in the back, and anytime we can introduce some green along the back band here, create better privacy, better separation. Yes, there is vegetation back there, but again, it is deciduous, it does drop. And so this will give a year-round screen in the back, and we think we can come up with a plan that will mitigate any impact associated with this development on those adjoining homes. With that backdrop, we'll launch into the relief that the applicant is seeking here. Again, basically threefold that have been identified by your planners, by your professionals as well. We've got the front setback relief. The sign on Wellesley has gone away. It's only the front setback on the Springfield side, which is consistent with what we see in terms of the prevailing setback on the street, and is also in favor of pulling the building away from the rear, which again, the beneficiaries there are the neighbors. So certainly on the positive side, I think we can see this as a better zoning alternative for the property. The planning intent to provide a walkable frontage is meant here as well by virtue of that sidewalk which will be very nice from a pedestrian standpoint. 11 feet wide to 13 feet wide is right in that, I'll say, sweet spot of approximately 12 feet that we planners like to see for a walkable downtown environment. The side yard setback, I think I'm going to just jump back up on the screen share again to make the point here that the side yard setback is triggered by lot 30.04, I'm sorry, block 30.04, lot 94, which is that transitional lot on Amherst. But bearing in mind, the setback relief is not needed from lot 94. We're actually compliant on lot 94. It's over on the commercial side from lot 30.04, lot 141, which is where we have the adjacent liquor store. You can see it here in the aerial. The required setback is 15 feet. We see no practical planning purpose being served by maintaining that 15-foot separation here. The 3-foot connector that the applicant is providing provides more than adequate walkable access back and forth. Vehicular access is not needed to the rear and not desirable in that regard. And again, we'll maintain that nice street wall effect that we see on the rest of Springfield. That also picks up here very slightly. You get a sense of the building that is to our right. It is a windowless building, so this is not going to impede light and air by putting a new building very close within that 3-foot setback area. Likewise, there is relief for the setback for the portion of the building that's over 30 feet. There is a step back of actually 0 feet versus the 18.34, which is similar to relief that we've seen elsewhere on the street. But more importantly, I'm going to go back to the exhibit that was provided by our architect, Mr. Waga. I'm not sure if this has actually been marked, Marcia, or if it's been handed up.
No, so this, if we can have this marked as A4, this exhibit was submitted after the last meeting that was submitted to Ms. Adele Lewis.
Okay, so just to give the
So we
board.
can have that marked as A4.
Gotcha.
Thank you.
For the record. So this may give the board a little bit of a visual that goes towards some of the earlier comments that Brian had answered and questions that our neighbors had as well. Let's start in the front. Springfield is going to be to the right. Dwellings on Amherst will be to the left. And again, this just gives a sense of the building massing, the lower area behind the building, which is approximately 12 feet wide. We're going to rise up with a retaining wall in the back, and another 5 feet before we hit that 4 to 5 foot high fence, wherever we land with the fence. And I'll say the fence type as well. You can certainly fold that into the landscape plan. The applicant is certainly willing to put in wood back there. There's some nice composite. There's a lot of good options other than the vinyl, if that's the preference of the board there, to go with some sort of alternate type of material, but certainly willing to put in the wood fence in the back. The main focus here is some of the markups we put in here in red just to help the board get a sense of why I think the relief for the portion of the building over 30 feet makes good practical planning sense here. The main thing is that we have a very wide sidewalk from this particular section. From this vantage, it's shown as 13 feet. I see some points where I think it actually measures at 11, others at 12. But here we're looking at a 13-foot sidewalk width, which we think is really what I'll say that step back provision of the ordinance is aimed at. We've seen it elsewhere on the corridor to provide that 20-foot step back from the curb line, not necessarily from the property line per se. The building is offset from the property line. I believe it's 1.3 feet, 1.4 feet versus the 12.5 feet that's going to be required. And then another important thing that I asked the applicant to look at when we write these codes, And when we see these codes from a planning standpoint, the main reason why we have this step back provision is in the interest of maintaining a sky plane or some view of the open sky to avoid an imposing structure from the public realm at the street level. And the typical standard is 10 degrees off of vertical. And what that means is if we were to strike a line 90 degrees straight up off of the ground, and then take an angle following the line of the building, 10 degrees would be a normal, appropriate sky plane here. This is not going to upset or violate that. It is in that 16 degrees that we're looking at here, somewhere in that range. So again, clearly respecting the 10 degree sky plane, sky exposure plane that we would typically look at from a planning standpoint. So with the combination of the 20-foot offset from the curb line with that, I'll say exaggerated sky exposure plane at the top. And again, bearing in mind, all of this relief comes back to the back and the fact that the applicant is respecting more area for greenery in the back and more separation to respect the privacy, air, the use and enjoyment of the lands behind the site. In that regard, I think that would also fall under the flexible C balancing test as a better zoning alternative for the property. You did see through Brian's plans that the applicant is proposing, I'll say, a serpentine walk in the back, which is a nice meandering walkway that from a landscape architectural standpoint is a perfect platform to work on because it does offer opportunities of exposed areas for plantings. I'll call them little pockets where we can work in some taller plantings and create that effect that I think I heard someone, maybe it was the chair or the councilwoman speak to with respect to creating greater variety in the back, not just going for a monoplanting of one type of plant along the back, but certainly creating some visual interest, some, I'll say planting diversity as well. We can create a very nice green backdrop in the back to soften, I'll say the harsh lines of the building. And then I'll say splash some color in the front so that against the green backdrop, we can create some color effect to create a nice look for those homes in the back. All said, I think the overall product is going to be very good and makes good practical planning standpoint in terms of the three bulk deviations that the applicant is seeking here, or the bulk relief that the applicant is seeking. Just to tie this back to the more, I'll say, legal proofs that are required under the flexible C balancing test. In terms of the positive criteria, we always come back to the purposes of zoning and those 16 or 20 purposes of zoning that are at the outset of the land use law and how they tie together. The courts tell us to look at the advantages of the project as a whole and the overall public benefits. And in this regard, there are a number of public benefits here, including the repurposing of vacant land and continuing that positive transformation of the corridor. This is going to be a very dramatic facelift for Springfield and will nearly span an entire block in the corridor. The project will certainly add life to Springfield. People are what make life. It is going to reactivate this space, and that's what makes a downtown work. The old adage of walking wallets who will contribute to those local businesses and spend locally, which will reinforce the whole aspect of the corridor to have a strong business base here. The more broader planning goals to promote efficient land use and a walkable pedestrian environment are also going to be met here as well. All of the above would advance the purposes of the land use law, but especially purpose A, the promotion of the general welfare, purpose E, the promotion of appropriate population densities, purpose G, the planning goal to provide for a variety of uses in appropriate locations, purpose I, the promotion of a desirable visual environment, and purpose M, the efficient use of land, taking previously disturbed land, substantially cleared land, and repurposing with something that certainly responds to current market demand and is harmonious with the surrounding area. Again, for all of the reasons that I've given from the practical side and the exhibits that I've shown, setback relief on Springfield, the side setback adjacent to the liquor store, and that height setback over 30 feet, all represent a better zoning alternative for this property and are certainly outweighed, I'll say, by the overall project betterments that the applicant is proposing here. There was also a bundle of design relief that you heard as well, which came out through your planner's report. And I will certainly rely upon the predicate that was put forth by Brian in terms of the relief for the loading area, the relief from the RSIS, the 63 spaces versus the 86, I believe is where the numbers are actually at. And per your code, I have 62, I think, versus 89 based on the 2 per dwelling unit and the 1 per 200 square feet. Either way, there's a shortage, but the justification and the reasonableness is that the supply will meet the actual demand here. Again, falling back on the testimony of Brian there from both a traffic and engineering standpoint. The test for design exceptions are lower than for balancing. The board does not have to move on the balancing and find that the betterments or the benefits outweigh the detriments, but simply that the applicant is meeting a standard of reasonableness consistent with generally accepted planning standards or industry standards, and certainly advancing the aspect of meeting impracticability, which is, I guess, a fancy way of saying that strict or literal requirement would serve no practical planning purpose in that regard. With that, I think I have hit all of the relief that the applicant is seeking here. This is substantially going to be consistent with the 2004 and 2011 master plan to emphasize the revitalization of Springfield Avenue with mixed use. The master plan promotes wellness and healthy livable communities through walkability, which is what this application will do as well. So again, this has evolved to land, I think, in a very soft spot from an applicant standpoint in terms of the relief that the applicant is requesting. Based on all of the testimony and all of the evidence that has been put forth before this board, I believe the applicant has met its burden here. Statutory criteria for grant of relief are met, and in that regard, approval is warranted. With that, I'll pause for any redirect or any cross from the board or public at this point.
I have nothing further for Mr. McDonough.
Okay, thank you. Do any members of the planning board have questions for Mr. McDonough? All right, seeing none, then we'll move on. We now have an opportunity for members of the public to ask Mr. McDonough questions regarding his testimony. If you would like to ask him a question, then please use the raise your hand function and we will work our way through those questions. Mr. Helmkamp. Oh, you're on mute.
Thank you. Good evening again. I have several questions. The first one, I guess I'd ask some indulgence because I don't believe it's the planner's purview, but in the elevation diagram that was shown, the fenestration is different than it was at the last meeting. And I'm wondering if there's anyone on the proposal team that can speak to that.
The only thing I'll say about that, just from a pure planning standpoint, since I was the one who used it as the tool, was not so much on the detail per se, but on the massing and just again to show how the relationship of the actual step back provision of the ordinance and the spirit of that step back provision is being met here.
So the window locations in the original drawing or the earlier drawing, 2 of them have moved and 2 additional ones have been added, although they don't appear to be aligned with the plan figures for the residential floors.
So again, to the extent that these are planning related questions, again, that from my standpoint is not, I'll say, relevant to my planning conclusions here with respect to that exhibit.
Understood. Will anyone on the planning team be able to address that?
So we do have our architect who's available. We have provided some revised renderings, so we do have our Gregory Waga to address any questions with respect to that.
Okay, will he be doing that now or later in the meeting?
It's up to the chair, but I believe it would be best suited to answer any planning questions, and then we can bring Mr. Wago forth.
That's fine. That's fine. Well, my second question for the planner is that you had mentioned that the sidewalk varies from 10 to 12 or 13 feet. In your sketch, you showed 13 feet. Is that the area at the corner Is that the portion that along the entire length that's 13 feet?
I think we're going to reserve that one for Mr. Waga as well, since that's where he struck the measurement. But my understanding is yes, but we'll let him affirm.
Okay. You had also shown in your sketch the setback request. And I believe that the setback is also needed at the level, the fourth level, the level above the residential, that structure over the entry area. That does not meet a 1 foot per foot over 30 feet. Do you believe that's true?
I agree with you, yes.
Okay. And then lastly, I understand your description of the 10% figure that's typical for providing additional sky plane, but would you agree that setbacks are also developed in some cases to mitigate bulk?
Typically, I think whenever we're dealing with bulk and I'll say intensity of use, it comes down to the carrying capacity of the land. It was important to me that the applicant has put forth testimony that the site can accommodate, I'll say, the intensity of development here from a functional standpoint, for sure.
So from a visual standpoint, does a step back mitigate bulk?
Again, for the reasons that I've given, I believe that the planning intent and to the extent that it does intend to control bulk as well, that has been met here.
But not to the degree required by the zoning?
That's correct. I mean, any variance is a degree of departure from the zone scheme, but I think the applicant, based on the evidence it's put forth, has given a very rational reason why that deviation is appropriate.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Schubart.
Hi, thank you very much again. Jeffrey Schubart, 12 Wellesley Road. Thank you for the testimony. I do agree that some of these things that you've mentioned, some of these reliefs that you're seeking do help the neighborhood, like the front setback, as you mentioned, does help the neighbors behind an Amherst Court. I'm still trying to wrap my head around how the parking spaces will help the neighborhood with asking for limited parking spaces. Could you expand? You said the supply will reach demand. I'm not sure how you've come to that conclusion if it doesn't meet the standard, with whatever standard that we've been given.
Sure. Again, falling back on Mr. Intendola's testimony, that the ratio here is typical of what we would see in the context of this type of a setting here. That additional parking would be wasteful, would be excessive, and would not be needed here.
Okay. And okay. All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Does anyone else have any questions for Mr. McDonough?
Can I just have a redirect on the setback, Brian, on the 1 foot that was referenced in Mr. Holloway's letter for the 1 foot of the setback from the property line for every 1 feet of setback is required from the property line for every building foot of elevation above 30 feet. If you can just elaborate a little bit, I know there was a comment from Mr. Hillcamp, I believe, but I just wanted to make sure the record set forth that we are asking for relief from that.
Yes, we are asking for relief for everything that's above that 30-foot mark. That's correct. And I think it showed up on Greg's plan as well.
As well, yes.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else with any questions for Mr. McDonough?
I have one follow-up question, if I may, to Mr. Hellcamp's question. I think it's a very good point that it's not just, the setback is not just about the sky plane, but of course about controlling bulk. And my question is, do you believe that the zoning is also there to help make it harmonious with other architecture in the context?
The short answer is yes. If I can elaborate on that, it is consistent with what we see on the streetscape as well. Some of the newer construction has similar step backs as well.
At this minor dimension,
Yes, and I say that because I've worked on them as well, including the one I'll say catty corner to the site. So it's not atypical of what I've witnessed or experienced on the street. And if it helps the board, I'll also just throw out, whenever we're talking about bulk as well, and I tried to elaborate on this, is that there are other indicators or controls for bulk, such as parking, setbacks, those kinds of things, which the applicant is substantially complying with here. Bearing in mind, in terms of the zone conforming, no height relief being needed here, no floor area relief being needed here, no coverage relief being needed here, no density relief being needed here. So there are other layers of control whenever we're dealing with bulk. I'd say the higher tiers of zoning bulk control are being met here. This is a more of a lower order control that I think really has more aspect with respect to that sky plane. It does have an element of bulk control to it, but there are other controls that are substantially met here.
I would go a step further and say that it has an impact on the architectural design as well. And I'm not sure what other properties on Springfield Avenue have such a nominal setback at 3 feet.
Are you talking about the front on the frontage on the ground level or the step back?
I'm talking about the 3rd floor setback.
Again, I'm not. I'd have to go back and look at my visuals of.
Well, the section that you showed indicates that the 3rd floor is set back 3 feet, and because of the 1 foot by 1 foot angle of repose that the building should have to comply with the zoning regulations, there's a amount of area both in the 3rd floor cornice and in the bulkheads on the roof that encroach, and that's one of the variances that you're seeking.
Correct.
Right? And my question was, do you believe that the zoning ordinance is also in control of not only bulk, but has an impact on the architecture, pursuant to the benefit that you claim that the building is harmonious with the surrounding area? And so the question is, where else on Springfield Avenue is there a 3 foot setback on an upper floor? I don't know that it exists.
I don't know.
Thank you. That's my question. I have nothing further, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Fryatt. Does anyone else, either from the planning board or from members of the public, have any questions remaining for Mr. McDonough? Ms. Moore, did you want to bring Mr. Waga back to address the questions that were raised?
Yes, I do.
Okay, Mr. Waga, welcome back. And I would remind you that you are still under oath.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good to see you. Oh, am I on? I am on. Thank you, Madam Chair. Good to see everybody. Yes, I can address that. And if I can share my screen, please.
Certainly. Ms. Miller will give you the power to share your screen. There we go.
Okay, thank you very much. So let me minimize who I see here. So zooming in here, the distance varies at the corner of Wellesley and Springfield. The distance off the face of the building to the curb is approximately 18 foot 10 inches. This distance is of 13 feet as reflected in my colleague's earlier testimony, Mr. McDonough. And now my reinforcement is of 13 feet is the majority of the width of the walkway, Mr. Hellkamp, as you proceed either east to west or west to east. The distance of the sidewalk, or the width of the sidewalk, or pedestrian walk, we'll call it, as you make the turn and head in a northerly direction on Wellesley, is actually about 24 feet in width. So it's substantial, because at one point we were constructing our building, with a different concept in mind, and in order to relieve ourselves and our client of a variance on that particular left side elevation, we brought the building in to satisfy that variance, and therefore you almost double the width of your walkway in that location. Does that help address that question?
Yes, it does.
Thank you.
Mr. Waga, did you also want to address the questions with respect to fenestration?
Yeah, so what we're doing here is this is kind of a work in progress, because we were working simultaneously on responding to those questions posed by the SAP. So this was to work in dual, and this isn't the red line document. This is part of the exhibits that were submitted through Marcia to your board last week. The red line document is a document that per our discussion, our team discussion yesterday, was only to help fortify our presentation and clarifying with a few more dimensions indicative of what the width of the walkway would be, what our sight line would be, as well as the distance from the face of curb to the setback above the plane, which would be then satisfying the 20-foot requirement above 30 feet. So that was a more or less a work in progress, as this elevation is as well. We do have other images that I can present. I don't know, to the board's desire. I know last meeting we concluded, but you let me know how long you want to go, and we can present.
Mr. Waga, along those lines, one of the comments I believe Ms. Adams and a couple of members of the board suggested was provide different renderings showing the elevation along Amherst and Wesley, and we have provided those renderings. So if you can present, we can have those marked as you presented, and just kind of show. I know it came up earlier by Ms. Adams that was requested, but we did provide that to to Ms. Lewis as part of it. Additional.
Yes. So I do have 6 exhibits, and they're labeled EX1, EX2, EX3, EX4, EX5, and EX6. And they're different. They're variations, or I should say updates to those renders that were submitted during or presented during our last meeting in January, other than EX6, of course, which is a direct correlation indicative of what exists out, or what will exist out on the site. I did visit the site. I did prepare myself this particular site analysis, the profile of the home that exists at 20 on the corner of Amherst and Wellesley. The only thing that's missing, we didn't feel it was of any importance, was the front portico and stair. It did have no effect, in my opinion, on this particular profile, as it did face Amherst. The trees that are deciduous in nature, majority of them are, varied in height from 35 feet up to about 85 feet. And you'll see that on my EX1 and EX3 exhibit. But they are deciduous species. The species, I'm not aware of what they may be. They may be maple, they may be pin oaks, they may be birch. I'm not sure, because they are in their deciduous state at this point. their hibernation stage. But the distances that are reflected on this particular elevation shot, which is of single dimension, is a direct proportion of what our building is here on Wellesley and Springfield, and direct correlation to the tree that is located on our neighboring property at 24 Amherst. I believe it was Miss Scott who testified earlier that she does live on this particular corner, and she is the only one who does have an attached garage that I'm aware of, because I did a thorough research on the properties on Amherst from the street. She does have an attached garage. Her garage door is located directly below what I think it might be a kitchen or kitchen eating area. The majority of the home varied in height, as you can see. Our gradation also does vary, sloping from Amherst, which is where my cursor is, in a southerly direction, flattens out somewhat. There was snow cover when I did prepare this from our storm a couple of weeks back. Her garage door is located where my cursor is, and she does park, or they do park, 2 vehicles in this location here. She has a 6-foot high wood fence, and it does vary in height and follow grade. There will be the variation, as both my colleagues testified, in great detail, especially Mr. Intandola, of the proportion of the new fence. Again, the height to be determined 4 or 5 feet, along with the retaining wall, which does vary in height. As we start off on this location here at Wellesley, on the Wellesley side, it does come out of the ground about 2 courses. And then by the time you get towards the midpoint of our site, you are up near 5 feet, if not 6 feet in some areas. And then you'll have the planting area and then the fence behind that. The distances from the fence, I did not access any of the properties. This is all based upon my interpretation of what exists. They may vary by a foot or 2, but not by much. I'm very confident in this presentation. Now I'll move forward to my EX1 exhibit, again, which is a color render of the corner shot, the infamous corner shot that we've been presenting over many meetings. And again, this is a work in progress. We've already started taking into consideration some of the SAP comments, but it is not complete. So I want to stress that. You can see here along Mr. Heldkamp, you can see the width of the walkway, the pedestrian walkway is much greater at this location. And again, this just shows a 13-foot offset here. We did not depict the parking in front, but that's, again, something that has been testified to in great detail this evening. So at this location will be 13 feet or 18 feet here, and then about 25 feet in this location. And you can see the variation, or the height of the adjacent dwelling at 24 Amherst in relationship to our structure. We feel, and I feel, that the top of the roof at 24 Wellesley will exceed the height of our building by about a foot, based upon grade. And that's my estimation. I'll move on to EX2, which is an evening shot, and EX3 now shows a greater clarity of what we feel exists. Along the backyard, Ms. Scott did allude to the fact that not every homeowner had a detached garage. She is the one who doesn't. There are 7 out of the 9 or 10 properties along Amherst that do have detached garages. And again, moving from left to right, this would be the tree that is located in between 24 and 20 Amherst, which we feel is about 70 to 75 feet high. Again, this has a wider spread here, probably a maple from what I feel. I do dabble in landscape, though I'm not a qualified or certified landscape architect, as my dear colleague, Mr. McDonough, is. I do dabble and enjoy landscaping, so I do make a determination here that with the wide girth that this is of a different species than what I presume is an oak tree in this location. And this is slightly higher, this tree, than the tree to the left. And as you proceed across and towards the center, and you'll see this more efficiently in my next slide or exhibit EX4. But we have here moving again left to right. The trees as we get down to Mr. Milan's property here, which is located, I believe he's at 6, which is on the far northeastern corner of the property. The trees tend to decrease or diminish in height, and so we're getting to about a 45 to 55 foot height, and so this will be what you'll actually see if you're standing back far enough, which will never really have this perspective because of the fact that we've got properties across from us that are much closer than the perspective that's given here. But the board did request this view, and I am providing something that is of a very, very close description or depiction, I should say. So again, we have a daytime, nighttime shot. Again, work in progress. You can see we have diminished some of it. We've taken to our colleagues in the SAP committee, we've already taken some of the comments into consideration, and we'll be able to address those when we're set to meet, hopefully sooner than later. Moving on to EX4, this is basically a shot without the detached garages, which on average have a height of about 15 feet. A number of them are 2-car, some of them are single car, but they are 15 feet in height on average. And if we were to implement those, the top of the cursor here is where those garages would be. A majority of the garages, and unfortunately, I don't have a screenshot of Mr. Intendola's site plan, are in close proximity. They are adjacent to each other. I don't know if the driveways are shared in some instances because, again, of the snow cover that I experienced during my site visit. So whether they're individual drives or shared drives, a number of the garages do abut each other in some instances. I think 2 instances, as a matter of fact, out of the 7 properties that do have detached garages out of the 9. But again, this is a depiction of scale, not necessarily species, but scale of trees. And we've got about 50% of the rear yard. Our neighbors, our residential neighbors, do have a 6-foot high fence of some sort. Again, wood and or vinyl, I'm not sure, but there is a 6-foot fence of some sort. And the other aspect of this is, again, as we proceed from right here, which is the westerly direction, and moving in an easterly direction, as my colleague, Mr. Intendola, explained earlier in his presentation, there will be an elevation increase, a slight elevation increase as we move towards our center. And I believe one of our board members or council members had indicated that there was a pair of doors, and I think that was fortified by one of the other council members. Here are the center doors here. So you can see that a majority of that rear elevation, which was depicted looking at it from in our last presentation, looking at it as though we were standing on our side of the property, is now screened. So all those graded openings that were providing fresh air into the parking area are now screened. You don't see those anymore. We will see, I'll show you in my next shot, which is an evening shot of this. We've diminished our lighting. We basically placed lighting in an arbitrary fashion. A number of the bedrooms do not have lights now. We've basically shown them in the living areas, but this is the exact same shot with the fencing in place. And you can see much of that lower portion of our structure now is screened. And again, I think with the let me just catch up here, with the revised and or projected or anticipated updated landscape plan that we will present to Mr. Holloway and this board through Mr. Holloway. I think you'll be very pleased to see that what's intended and what Mr. McDonough has expressed in his presentation a few minutes ago will in fact allow for a greater screening of that lower portion. So in essence, again, taking grade into consideration, because as I believe Ms. Scott and Mr. Milan testified, as you move from west to east, Amherst crowns at about number 14 or number 12 Amherst. And then it begins to take a slope downward towards, I believe it's Tuscany or Tuscan. I'm not sure, forgive me. But as you're traveling from west to east, it does crown in the center of, more or less the center of Amherst. And then it does begin to decrease in slope as you move in an easterly fashion. So the grade does vary, but this is an idea of what one would see from the center portion of Amherst, whoever occupies that. I think it's either 10 or 12, I'm not sure, or yeah, 10 or 12. And then finally, moving on to, we've already covered it, EX6. We've got the profile showing the direct correlation of 24 Amherst to our proposed structure.
So Madam Chair, for purpose of the record, I submitted that as A5, is consistent of 6 pages.
That's fine. Thank you. So noted.
Just going to get some water, excuse me.
Certainly.
I've been known to whack water in my testimonies. I apologize, Madam Chair. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Waga. That was very helpful. I had specifically requested the profile view that shows the home on Wellesley at the corner. Yes, this one. And I find this very helpful. I trust that other members of the board do as well. So to members of the planning board, do any of you have any questions for Mr. Waga regarding his current testimony, his additional new testimony?
Just one, maybe I missed it, but so when you were showing the trees in the back, those are all trees that are on the single family resident properties, right?
Yes, Ms. Ward,
Okay.
yes.
All right, just, okay, thanks.
Yes, yes.
I'll just say to Mr. Waga that the profile image is very helpful to help us to have a clearer understanding of how the new building, the correlation to the single family property. So thank you for providing that. That rendering in particular, I think answered a lot of questions that we've been asking for. No, the drawing, the side profile that you just got up, that's very helpful for us to sort of have an opportunity to sort of stand on the street and understand sort of the size and the grade and how that would affect the neighboring single family homes behind the property. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
I completely concur with Ms. Denuser. This really answered a lot of the spatial questions that I was wrestling with.
Yes, indeed.
Do any other members of the planning board have any questions for Mr. Waga? All right then, are there, I want to be mindful of the time. It is 10 of 11. So do any members of the public have any questions for Mr. Waga? Mr. Helmkamp. Nope, you're on mute, Mr. Helmkamp.
Actually, my fingers were just a little bit slow that time.
Oh, okay, I thought you were already talking. Go ahead.
So this is more a point of procedure, perhaps. I'm wondering if the applicant will be back to the planning board when these design decisions are finalized. Mr. Waga mentioned a number of points that were a work in progress.
Well, the work in, go ahead, sorry. Again, the work in progress matters, Mr. Helmkamp. We're primarily with the Springfield Avenue Partnership. And they were design elements per our numerous meetings with that board regarding aesthetic materials. A number of materials have already been decided upon. We're now fine tuning various relief elements on the facade, projections, but a number of the materials have already been selected and agreed upon between the SAP as well as our team.
I guess I'm not familiar with applicants that have been fully approved by the planning board and then later approved by the Springfield Alliance. Is that?
Well, we're allowed to approve it dependent upon agreement with the applicant coming up with a design scheme that is approved by the Springfield Avenue Partnership. It's a condition.
Okay, my mind, at least at this point, is particularly on the eastern and western facades and the parent work in progress regarding the fenestration. And are we basically deferring that to the Alliance?
Well, the fenestration is not is not something that the planning board needs to approve or not approve of ultimately.
Okay, and then also I was offline on and off. I had a connection problem, but I had asked the question earlier about whether or not the fourth level also is outside of the step back requirement. And was there any further discussion of that?
I thought that Mr. Waga covered that.
Regarding the fourth level as well as the third level. In other words, if you extend the 1 foot per 30 up to the fourth level, it's also outside of the step back requirement.
I
Robert,
believe
can you
they,
touch upon that again?
Was that a question for me?
No, I was asking Mr. Waga to answer your question.
Okay, so we satisfy. I'm going to zoom in on this profile. We satisfy our step back on our access area here at the front elevation. This actually occurs. Let me zoom out here. This actually occurs quite a distance off of Wellesley. It's more or less in the center of the site, but when you're looking at it in single dimension profile, it seems as though it's right on top of you. So this is actually quite a distance away. This is our stair tower, so that has nothing to do with any type of setback. But with the 20 feet off off the property or off the face of curb in this particular case, which we are. And again, unfortunately, I don't have that red line document, but if you recall, there were 3 items that were redlined on Mr. McDonough's presentation or his exhibit. One was the 13-foot here for the walkway, which is the majority of the walkway. The other one was the sight line here of between 10 and 16 degrees. And then this was highlighted at 20 feet from face of curb. We satisfy that anything above 50 feet is 20 feet off of the face of curb.
I thought the requirement was from the facade.
No, not along this. This decision has been taken into consideration, and I think Ms. Moore can assist with that, or Mr. Intandola can interject as well. But the determination was not from the property line; it was from face of curb on Springfield Avenue.
I see. Well, the drawing is misleading, or at least confusing to me, because the diagonal line shown is from the property line.
It's from the property line, but that's at 30 feet.
That's right.
Not 50. If we went up to 50, this building, we decreased the height to below 50, so as not to create any type of further confusion and or variance. And by decreasing it, by decreasing our parapet heights, we were able to get to 47'8", and we still satisfied the 20-foot offset from face of curb.
I see.
I'm sorry. I think the question was, does the rooftop bulkhead, is it a part of the variance request for the setback? And the answer was yes. In other words, that 45
This here.
Yeah, that line extends up and goes through the bulkhead. So there should be a hatched area at the corner of the bulkhead parapet as well.
Yeah, but then we're beyond 20 feet. We're beyond 20 feet, Mr. Fryatt. From here to the face of curb is our 20-foot setback. So we're set back here.
All I'm doing is saying what Mr. McDonough answered, and that's how I understood it. Correct me if I'm wrong, but the answer was that the bulkhead is also encroaching, and that's a part of the variance request.
I don't believe it is. I'm not going to speak on Mr. McDonough's behalf, but he might have thought that you meant this area here, because we're at 20 feet and this is our cutoff, our break point here. That's
Okay.
our interpretation.
I think that's something that perhaps the township engineer should weigh in on.
I think if it's shown correctly from the property line, and I think there's some exemptions for bulkheads from the setback, so I think it is shown correctly.
That the rooftop bulkhead can encroach into that space, or it's beyond 20 feet, as Mr. Wager asserts, and therefore it's not a part of the variance.
I don't think it's a part of the variance. I think the setback and the fact that it's a bulkhead exempts it from the variance.
Thank you for clarifying.
I guess this is a point of education for me. That bulkhead also contains storage for tenants. I didn't realize that would be considered a bulkhead. It actually has conditioned space. Is that what that is still considered a bulkhead?
Yes, it would still be considered a bulkhead in this case because of the access with the elevators.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, that's a good point, though. I mean, that is occupied floor area, and they're permitted to have that floor. So I would think it would be floor area, not a bulkhead.
Right, sounds correct.
Right, it's another story.
Oh, yeah.
So the review of the project used it as a bulkhead because there was nothing also to be used on the access to the roof area.
Well, and the decision to use it as storage space came later, didn't it?
That was my recollection, that there would be storage space on in this top area, which is identified as.
Can we take a look at the roof plan again?
I'm not in a position to share that at this moment. I'd have to dig that up somehow.
Okay.
Well, why don't we do this? Given that this is an outstanding question, and it is 11 o'clock, I propose that we, with Ms. Moore's agreement, that we conclude for this evening and take this up at our next meeting. And in the meantime, Mr. Holloway can revisit it. Mr. Waga can be prepared next time to show the roof line so that Mr. Titus can be satisfied with his question. And I recognize that Mr. Mulan has additional questions. We can pick this up at our next meeting. Is that, are you in agreement with that plan, Ms. Moore?
I'm sorry. Can you give 5 minutes to speak to my client, please?
Certainly.
Thank you.
Please go ahead.
Do we know how many more witnesses that we should be expecting for this project?
I believe that that they have now presented all their witnesses, but certainly there's still an opportunity for them to present any closing remarks that they might have, opportunities for members of the public to provide any testimony in favor or in opposition, an opportunity for us to any final public comments, an opportunity for us to deliberate. So if I thought that we could wrap this up within the next 30 minutes, I would be asking us to consider continuing this evening, but I'm not sure that we can accomplish all of that in approximately that amount of time. And I do want to be sensitive to everyone, to the fact that, you know, it is late.
Yeah, Madam Chair, I think that's very fair to be sensitive to the late hour, but just having some idea if we're through the witnesses and there's this outstanding question about the roof line, there's a 5-minute request to talk with the client. I would be interested to know just how reasonable it will be for us to get to some point where there's some closure to this, you know.
Karen, can I interject something?
Absolutely, Mr. Carlson.
When we're talking about what we want to see them bring back, we want to see a landscaping plan too, in line with what Ms. Adams requested.
Certainly, I think, you know, we've talked about landscaping plans. We've talked about fencing elements. I think that also having them come back would give them an opportunity. I think they have Mr. Fry can confirm, I think they have plans to meet with the Springfield Avenue Partnership Design Review Committee coming up. So that might also clarify some things. Is that accurate, Mr. Fryatt?
There is not a date set at present. There was a request for additional information from the Springfield Avenue Partnership to the applicant.
Okay. So while I agree with Ms. Denuzer's desire to bring some sort of closure, at the same time, I don't think we're quite there yet in terms of the things that this board is requesting and will request for them to, before they come back. And I think that will also give them time to make some, I'm hoping that it will give them some time to meet with the Springfield Avenue Partnership Design Review Committee and then get some decisions to conclusion there, which I think will facilitate our own efforts to reach closure and conclusion.
That's fair. And I think that some of the things that are being promised to SAP are things that we've asked for. Although aesthetic, they do have some implications on our planning purview. So that circle being looped back as well and having information on what's decided on that front would also be helpful.
I agree. I agree. I will, when they return, I will ask Ms. Moore if we have heard from all of their witnesses.
I think she's back.
Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, so I didn't hear quite everything because I was speaking to the client, but I just wanted to clarify exactly the reason why we're coming back. So we have concluded our planning testimony, our engineer testimony. This question on of storage of Mr. Waga on this bulkhead and what Mr. Holloway's indicated, I just want to make sure that's been clarified because we did not intend to bring back Mr. Waga except for any additional comments to address the SAP. I need to clarify that. We are bringing back a landscaping plan for Mr. Intadola along with John McDonough, but I just wanted to make sure that the board had no questions regarding that our application's always been deemed as storage. So I know there was a question that recently whether or not it was storage in this iteration or prior iteration, but what was approved or reviewed by Mr. Holloway for our application be deemed complete, it always intended for it to be storage. So I just want to make sure that those questions are not being asked or will be asked again at the next planning board meeting.
Mr.
I can talk with the architect directly, so there would be no need for him to be at the meeting itself.
Karen? Is there a member of the public that wants to question Mr. Waga?
That's a good question. Right now, I have Mr. Helmkamp. Have you asked all your questions of Mr. Waga that you wanted to?
Yes, I have.
Thank you. Mr. Milan, do you have questions specifically for Mr. Waga?
I do. I promise it's one question, so I'll keep it quick.
Okay, I'm willing to go with that. Go ahead.
Mr. Waga, if you could hop to page 4/5 of this. I just wanted to point out, I really appreciate you doing these drawings again.
Is it this? This is, I actually have 6. So you said 4 or 5. I actually have 6.
Yes.
Is it this drawing?
Yes, it is this and the nighttime drawing as well. Because I wanted to point out how much the trees here, the mature trees that are on the property line of Amherst, really take the project impact from a privacy standpoint. It significantly improves the privacy of both the building and the residents, as well as the impact that the building has of just the general character of the overall neighborhood. And my question is whether you know how many of these trees exist, or at least like what general percent coverage of the building exists with trees that would be on Amherst properties.
So I believe the overall width, I did take a count, but again, to the best of my ability from Springfield Avenue side, I didn't want to burden any of the property owners on Amherst by accessing, as I alluded to during our last meeting. I believe there are between 9 and 11 trees that exist on Amherst property. Okay. I don't know. Again, I didn't have the site plan. I'm not a surveyor. I understand grade. I understand the process of engineering, but where the property line fell, Mr. Milan, in direct correlation to where the vegetation exists, couldn't tell. Okay, so the cluster of vegetation, we'll call it, that exists in the northeast corner, which is directly adjacent to or closest to your property. I don't know, because it was on the incline of grade in some instances. And so again, varied in nature, not sure, because I can't tell. They're in their hibernation stage right now. I couldn't tell what species they were, but in doing so, the cluster will help. I don't know what exists and how will impact. I'm sure it would have an impact on your property and the neighboring property, but to what level, I can't answer.
Okay, makes sense.
But they did vary in height. You're at your property line, or closest to your property. That's where, again, the canopy was narrower. The trees were greater in quantity, but they were more columnar in nature. Whether they were locust or cypress, I'm not sure. But that's the type of bark that they held. But the canopy, the overall height, was on the decline as you went in an easterly fashion, where yours, I anticipated or estimated your trees in that area to be about 35 feet high. And then the eclipse, once they got to 20, that was the tallest tree, which was about 80 to 85 feet high. And then it dropped down to about 70 to 75, which was a tree that was just behind or on the rear left corner of 24 Amherst.
Yep, that makes a lot of sense to me. Even in their non-dormant state, I would not be able to tell you what kind of tree they were.
Right.
But thank you for the explanation, and it provides context around why understanding exactly what that landscaping plan looks like means so much.
Okay.
Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Milan, for keeping that brief. So
Madam Chair,
yes.
excuse me, Madam Chair, if I may. I know it's very late in the hour and I appreciate the time, but we just wanted to bring back Mr. Badana to answer one question that Mr. Fry had raised as far as the setbacks concerned. We think it will take about a minute, but we just wanted to get that on the record prior to concluding tonight.
Yes, that's fine. Thank you.
Thanks, Madam Chair. It'll actually take 30 seconds. I can't remember which board member asked me another building that had a non-conforming step back on that. I think it was the 4th story. But the answer is catty corner across the way right there. I had worked on the Elite project, and that's actually flush 4 stories up. That's within the 200-foot ring. It's flush from top to bottom.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
That was not my question. My question is, where is there a 3-foot setback that exists? And you in your testimony previously, I thought you had suggested that that was a condition that existed on the avenue.
No, that's not correct.
That answers my question. Thank you.
All right then. So at this time we are going to temporarily conclude the work on this application, and we will continue at our next meeting. And I don't have the date in front of me.
Hold on, I think we might be able to pull it up if I can find.
It's the 9th. It's the same as.
It is March
Same
9th.
day, same day.
March 9th.
Oh, of course, I should have realized that. February has 28 days, of course. So March 9th, we will have the applicant back, and we at that time, Ms. Moore, we would like there to be a landscaping plan. And I believe Ms. Adams asked for a sample of the fencing. Now I realize that that you're still planning to meet with the Springfield Avenue Design Review Committee. I'm hopeful that perhaps that will happen between now and March 9th.
May I just reserve, so we don't have a specific date for the Springfield Avenue Partnership, and I don't know if it's within our 10 days prior to our hearing. That would be our concern. Again, I believe there was that's a comment. Provide revised documents, but I don't know if we're going to anticipate any comments back prior to the meeting in order for us to meet our deadline or statutory deadline of 10 days.
Okay,
That would
understood.
be my concern.
Completely understandable. Is there anything else that any members of the planning board would like to specifically request from the applicant for our next meeting that would help continue the process? All right then. So thank you, Ms. Moore. Thank you to your team for their testimony and work this evening. At this time,
Chair, if I may, just one question on procedural for your board. So I know there's been a series of questions going back and forth from the public. Is it the intent also now to open up to the public, or after the, I just want to know procedurally how you handle that.
Sure. So my intent right now was to open it up to the public specifically for anything that anyone might want to address, not regarding your particular case, but if anybody had anything else that they wanted to bring before the planning board. My plan was that in terms of any final testimony for or against, or final comments with respect to the application, to hold that over until the next meeting.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. So are there any members of the public who wish to address the planning board regarding anything other than the application? All right, seeing none, I'd like to entertain a motion to adjourn for this evening.
I make a motion that we adjourn for this evening.
And a second?
Second.
And all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you all very much. See you next month.
All righty. Bye-bye now.
Have a good night.
Stay safe and well.
Thank you so much. Have a good evening, everybody.